Thanks, Mark, and thanks again for everybody that put together those videos. Those are going to be helpful ways to kind of watch the condensed version of what's in this year's budget. So moving on, pull up the PowerPoint. Tonight, I'll start going through some of the agendas. He's doing that. First thing we're going to go through quickly is the budget calendar, just as a reminder of where we are at. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the city council priorities and how they are addressed in this year's biennial budget. We'll actually do the rest of the budget presentation at that point, after which we'll have public comment. The budget committee will consider approval of the proposed biennial budget and then consider approval of tax rates as well. So here's the budget calendar. Mark, if you go to 2 more slides.
And Robbie, as committee members have questions,
Anytime.
anytime.
You bet.
And just for the sake of those who are watching or listening online, you could identify yourself as you saying.
Go to the next one. So here's a look at the budget calendar. If you remember, February 22nd is when we met with the budget committee to give kind of a forecast and what to expect. Today is obviously the proposed budget presentation. I think you all got either digital or hard copies back on May 4th. After today, the staff will prepare the budget for adoption of the next month, which will be actually adopted with any kind of modifications by the city council on June 20th. And then July 1st is when the budget gets certified with Washington County. So on the screen, you'll see, first of all, on the left, show this every time. Those are some of the key budget priorities that we look at every time we do a budget: with financial stability, public safety, economic vitality, livability, and infrastructure. And then on the right, you'll see this year's 2023 city council priorities. So I'm going to go through right now and just kind of highlight each of those 7 core areas. This is not an exhaustive list of everything, but I'm going to try to highlight at least some of the big things that we're doing in each of these categories. So our first is racial equity goals. And rather than read through all the goals, you can see those on the left. I'm going to spend my time talking about the areas that we're actually addressing in this year's budget. So first of all, we did recently hire within the past couple of months the city's new diversity, equity, inclusion manager, and it's Eunice Mackenday. Very excited to have Eunice on board. She's hit the ground running. And so we are going to specifically in this budget continue development of the DEI competencies, both at the city council level, city leadership team level, boards and commissions, and throughout the city. We have a draft strategic equity plan, and that plan, we're going to be finalizing those initiatives. We are going to be connecting those initiatives to our human resources policies over the next year, and we're going to be providing significant training throughout the city as well. We have a keen eye on our recruitment policy and our recruitment practices, trying to identify how we can implement equity hiring through our flow assessment, and also working on expanding and tracking our training participation for our supervisor academy. And that's really to make sure that our supervisors and everybody hiring managers have that type of training as we are trying to continue to diversify and still diversity, equity, inclusion in our organization. And lastly, our supplier diversity program. We're implementing department project plans. We're launching a new MWESB business directory. We will continue to track our supplier data, and we are planning a new Westside Open House 2.0 because 1.0 was so successful this past year. So we're going to be doing another one this year in September. The second area is the city's strategic plan. We are appreciative that the city council made this a priority. The city of Hillsborough, the last time we did a strategic plan was actually back in 2010. And so it's time to do a new strategic planning effort. This is in addition to these community's 2035 vision, which is much more outwardly focused and community focused. Our strategic plan is inward focused and helps us as staff understand how we can work together as a full service city to implement our community's goals, our city council's goals. Moving on to public safety. So one of the positions that we're actually adding this year is a new law enforcement analyst supervisor. This addresses the goal that we've had for the past couple of years to try to be better data informed in our public safety efforts. We are adding a new code compliance officer in the second year of the biennium. And I just want to call attention to the important role that our code compliance officers play, not only in what they do on a routine basis, but the additional efforts that have been asked of them in terms of homelessness over the past few years is significant. They work directly with our police officers, and what they do is really important. So we're going to add one more of those positions next year. I do also want to call attention to the fact that we are adding additional money for recruitment for police officers. You'll notice that there are no new police officer positions included in the budget this year. The reason for that is because we have a significant amount of vacancies in police officer positions. That is not unique to Hillsborough. Cities, counties across the country are struggling right now with recruiting that important position. And so we want to focus our efforts this year on actually our recruitment and try to figure out how we can fill the vacancies that we have. Chief Coleman and I have had many conversations about this, and if we get to a point where we're successful in filling those positions and we need more, that's something that I'll come back to the city council to advocate for positions at that point.
Robbie, is the code compliance officer, is that a sworn or a non-sworn position?
Code compliance is a non-sport position. Okay, any other questions on this?
Yes, so you know, on this slide, it's mentioning 10 new firefighters. Can you, that's for South Hillsborough,
Yes.
and is that the most positions that we can fill? 10 and not 15, I'm just asking for.
You bet. Yeah, yes, I'll actually address that right now. So in the general fund proposed budget, you'll see that there are 5 positions in year 1, 5 positions in year 2. There's actually another 5 positions that we're planning the first year of the following biennium. So we'll have our plan is to staff that fire station with 15 firefighters. It takes, for those that maybe we haven't talked about this yet, but once that fire station is open, we want to be ready and have firefighters ready to go into it, right? We don't want to build it and not have firefighters. Firefighters take several months to kind of get through the process of training and everything to become ready to serve as a firefighter. So we're starting that process now, and our goal is to have 15 firefighters. It's just that this biennium we have 5 in the first 2 years.
So those positions are going to be staggered over the biennium budget, and not like 3 consecutive years.
Well, it will be 3 consecutive years. So it'll be 5 this year that we're actually recruiting for right now.
Okay.
We'll have 5 in the second year of this biennium, and then we'll have 5 in the first year of the next biennium as well. So over the next 3 years, we will have recruited for 15 new firefighter positions.
Okay.
You bet. And then also just on this slide, I just wanted to call attention to the medic area. We continue to staff. This was added this past year. That has been a very successful medic unit, very busy. The need is there, and that will continue into the new biennium as well. All right, moving on to housing and homelessness. So you saw in the video a couple of things that were addressed. First of all, $10.5 million for the new Dolores project by Hacienda, a wonderful opportunity that we have using Metro bond funds. We continue to work with Habitat for Humanity to build out the Century Commons. The next few are CDBG related, where we're going to be focusing on acquisition, rehabilitation, and working with Project Homeless Connect with some public facility improvements. And then we have our impact grant to address housing stability as well. And then homelessness is, again, a very high priority. We purchased land within the past couple of years on the west side of town. We have a significant amount of money dedicated to building that shelter over this biennium. There is a gap, and so we do have funding requests into the state, federal government, and also working with Washington County to help us kind of fill that gap as well. We have continued grants that will support youth experiencing homelessness through Home Plate, nonprofit daycare operation, day center operations, community service grant program, and our cleanup projects that have been very successful that we've actually been using a lot of our ARPA dollars around town. Next is community engagement outreach, and Marcus Ford is actually the city's community engagement manager. He was hired back in December. He's also doing an amazing job. Some of the items that we're working on specific to community engagement includes developing a stipend and compensation policy for Hillsborough boards and commissions. We've talked about developing and implementing a language access policy that continues to be front and center in our communication staff specifically, and what we can do to make sure that we are translating and giving language access to everybody that needs it throughout the community. Operationalizing community engagement strategic plan. So you've seen, I think the city council had a work session on this, and so we're going to be working on that over the next year to continue to operationalize it. And that includes things like implementing community member and CBO consulting fees, developing sponsorship policies and land acknowledgement policies, and revising our proclamation policy as well. A couple of years ago, some of you might remember, there was a Metro grant that was specific to engaging marginalized communities in the land use planning. It was very successful, and we are continuing that effort using city funds as well. We've worked with Washington County and Beaverton to develop a multi-jurisdictional community engagement strategy to really learn from our communities of color to figure out how we can better engage with them and create more capacity building. And then finally, our Youth Advisory Council, something that's been a priority for many years that will also continue in this year's budget. Economic and community development. Anybody that's driven along Evergreen anytime recently will notice all the work that's being done up there. That continues to be a top priority, and especially the urban renewal area. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in today's presentation. Our industrial land planning, this is something that you probably have seen in the papers that we're working on at the state level as well. Block 67, we do have a developer that we're working with to try to figure out what is best for Block 67. We've spent a considerable amount of time and we continue to do so for the biennium working on 10th Avenue with County Diaz, working with the community there for a visioning process. We have an open baseline study going on. Actually, right now, you can go to the city's website and actually chime in on Engage Hillsborough about what the open baseline study entails and what we should be considering. And then storefront and tenant improvement grants continue to be successful all through our downtown and 10th Avenue areas. And workforce preparedness and skills development. This has been long a city council priority. We will continue the Future Connect CTE career guidance program relationship that we have. We have a Prosperidad Economic Empowerment Center through our eZone funds. We continue to work with other skill and workforce preparedness. You'll see $1.1 million. There's dozens of different projects outlined to be able to use those funds. Youth apprenticeship programs and operator training internships. Some of you at the city council meeting about a month ago saw just the fruits of those amazing internship and operator and training internships specifically, and how successful those have been for the city. And last one is environmental sustainability. Robin Strong is actually our new environmental and resiliency manager is her title. Really excited to have Robin on board. You'll notice the first couple talking about Solarizing Hillsborough campaign, figuring out how to incorporate more solar energy throughout the city. Environmental resource management that includes implementing some of the top recommendations of a study that was done over the past couple of years, an assessment of how and what we do as a city in terms of our environmental resources. We continue the wood stove exchange program working with the county, Washington County. We implemented successfully a home energy score program that the city council heard previously about. That will continue, including grants for low-income residents that need help with that. And finally, working with residential energy efficiency retrofits to support our low-income energy efficiency residents that need assistance with that. So I know I kind of went quickly because there's a whole lot more to come and some more detail, but I at least wanted to share the highlights of how we are specifically addressing those city council priorities that have been given to us in this year's or this biennium's budget. Anybody have any questions before I turn it over to Suzanne? If not, turn it over to Suzanne. Thanks.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. I wanted to say thank you take a second to say thank you. I know we've already, the mayor's done that and Robbie's done that, but I feel it's important that I acknowledge you all, especially the finance staff, Gabe and Lauren, looking at both of you, and John Campbell and John Grover and Michelle. It's been a really heavy lift, and we would not be here but for the work that they've done over the last however many months. Also to acknowledge IS, they worked on Gordon, worked on our reporting, and it's been a lot. And all of course the departments do had to build 2 budgets, 2 years versus 1. So I just want to really say thank you. We would not have gotten this far without all of you. So thank you very much. So yeah, Robbie said he wanted a biennium budget, and we're like, okay, sure. And now we have a biennium budget. It's amazing, but we don't yet actually need to approve the budget. So let me not get ahead of myself too much. So I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to talk about the assumptions that we were using for this budget. So a lot of this you saw back in February, and it's changed some, but not a lot. But we will go through that first. And on the left here, you see a few of the milestones. So we started the year with having our assessed value come in higher than our projections, which is obviously a better position to be. However, even with those higher projections, we're having a hard time keeping pace with our escalating costs. And future slides, we'll talk about our AP growth, and you'll see that. And we'll also talk about our escalating costs as well. This slide again, you saw most of this in February, it provides information on some of the things we know going into this coming fiscal year, which is always nice to know that we have the local option levy secured for several more years as we do the WCCLS levy. And the WCCLS levy over the biennium will bring in 11.95 billion. It's not, sorry, I shouldn't say just the levy. It's the county portion as well as the levy that is anticipated and budgeted to bring in around 11.95 billion to continue to support library services. The local option levy is 58.5 million over the biennium. So based on the size of both of those, it's clear that we are very reliant on those two revenue sources to maintain our existing service levels in public safety as well as our libraries. Library member agencies, Hillsborough are receiving less in cooperative payments, at least for 23-24. We're not sure about 24-25 because the county doesn't submit doesn't do a biennial budget. We have been told budgeted for it to be flat, but we understand that they have proposed a 1% increase in their WCCLS budget, but it hasn't, of course, been approved. So the mayor mentioned that earlier. They start their budget meetings tomorrow. Again, typically we would see a 3% growth rate year over year. So we'll be fortunate if we see a 1% increase in our cooperative payment. So we again kept that flat for both years of the biennium. We've seen sizable increases in the increment in both North Hillsborough and downtown, and we'll have some slides later to show you on that, which are allowing us to tackle the planned goals, including land aggregation in North Hillsborough for future development. We are using a 5% growth rate in AV due to the growth we've seen in the last few years and the continued construction we're seeing in South Hillsborough. We are anticipating our transient lodging tax and our parks program revenues to continue to rebound to pre-pandemic levels over the biennium. We'll talk about that more later. Let's see. I do this every time. You think I was an amateur. What's that? Okay. For the water utilities, we are proposing the Utilities Commission has already approved a rate increase of 8.9% and 10.5% for other customer classes for the January 2024. So starting in 2024, they've already approved those rate increases because they did a 2-year rate increase the last time. So we don't know the rate increase for January of 2025, but we have budgeted, assuming that there will be an increase. We have a placeholder in there. We have increases budgeted in clean water services for sewer and storm at 4% each, starting in July of 2023 and estimated again in July of 2024 at the same amount of 4%. We will also be increasing the city's local service fee for storm by 50 cents to get to backlog of maintenance in our storm system. City Council had several work sessions on this a while ago and decided to increase that from $1 to $2 and then escalate that by 50 cents until we reach the cap of $4. We anticipate reaching that cap in January of 2025. So you will have a 50-cent increase in January 23 and January of 25. We're not anticipating any other fee increases in the proposed budget at this time. So now getting to the expenditure side of the house. The proposed budget includes 37.7 positions in the first year and 35 in the second year of the biennium. 3 of these positions were added mid-fiscal year, so mid-fiscal 2022-23. So this totals 73 positions over the biennium, representing 7.6% increase in staffing from the current year, 22-23. The new positions cross most, if not all, departments and are in response to a backlog from the pandemic, with, of course, obviously always the goal to maintain our existing service levels. The positions are listed in the exhibit tab, and I also have a slide coming up where you'll be able to see them by department. And just to give you some scale and some reference, in 22-23, we added 34.5 positions to the budget with a similar theme of trying to continue to maintain service levels in a growing city. The proposed budget also includes 4% cost of living adjustment for all non-represented positions. The all US CPI, the January to January index that we've often used as a guide, was running at 6.2%. Fortunately, down from its 40-year high of 8% last year. We are not alone in not being able to keep pace with this type of inflation. There are signs that it is coming down, but we need to balance the needs of our employees with our ability to pay and to sustain any increases that we were to put forward. We're also seeing, we're anticipating double-digit medical increase. This is in each year of the biennium. We're also in the first year of the first PERS operates on a biennium, and this is what's nice is our new biennium will go into the PERS biennium. So we are seeing PERS increases over the course of the biennium between 5 and 8%, depending on the tier, whether it be tier 1, tier 2, tier 1 or 2, officer or officer police fire. There have been years that we had a COLA that was actually negative, and we still provided a wage adjustment. That doesn't feel really good for people to hear that, but that is actually just something I like to share because there have been years in the past where COLA actually ran negative. We actually still provided a wage adjustment to our employees. We continue, of course, to understand the toll that not being able to keep up with inflation is having on our employees, and of course, not to mention the community. But we feel that 4% hopefully goes away to help offset some of these additional costs as we continue to monitor what is happening with cost of living adjustments. We also ended up providing our non-represented employees an additional 2% in September of 2022, which was an addition to the 4% that was originally planned for the budget year 22-23. The fire rank and file are in negotiations currently, so we don't have a cost of living adjustment known at this time. HPOA is at 4 and 4, so their contract goes through the end of the biennium. They'll receive 4% cost of living adjustment starting in July of 23 and another one in July of 24. The International Association of Firefighters Battalion Chiefs are also having a contract through the biennium. They will receive a cost of living adjustment of 4% plus a wage adjustment of 2% in the first year, and a 3% cost of living adjustment and cost of living adjustment in the second year, and a wage adjustment of 1% in the second year. Our library ASME union is receiving a 3% to 5% cost of living adjustment for their agreement, and then their agreement sunsets in June of 2024, and therefore we will be in negotiations with them for that second year biennium. Medical and PERS continues to place significant pressures on our costs with a budget increase of 12.9 in 23-24 and 11.9 in 24-25. We are going to be going out to bid this summer to test the market, and those are just placeholders. At this point in time, we don't actually have our actual rates. Those are our estimated rates coming from our providers. But we won't get our actual rates considering that we are at January to January year. We won't get those until later summer, early fall. Again, yeah, our rates are on a calendar basis. Depending on the tiers, PERS will add between 18.68 cents to up to 24.68 cents for every dollar in wages paid. So depending on whether you're officer or you're tier 1/2, if you're tier 1, tier 2, for every dollar in wages that you're paid, you will almost be paying an additional 25 cents on top of that for the PERS benefit. Medical and PERS combined totals 29% of the total personal services cost for the biennium, or $102 million. The average cost per person for a family is around, in medical premiums, is around $30,000 per year. The budget also includes the second year of payments to the state under the paid family leave program. This is a shared cost between the employee and employer, with the employee paying 60 cents, 60.6%, and the employer us paying 0.4. Just also a reminder, we continue to provide part-time benefits for those eligible that work regularly scheduled to work over 25 hours per week. And we have had quite a few takers on that over the course of, since it's been offered to our employees. We also have a deferred comp match. If you put in 1% into deferred comp, we will match you up to 1% for non-represented employees. And our HPOA, as well as our library union employees, are both our fire union are at 2% wage match for deferred comp. Deferred comp match, not wage match. Next slide, please. Any questions? I can pause for a second. No, not yet. Okay. So here is our proposed 23-25 biennium budget. It is a almost $1.9 billion budget over the course of the biennium. This graph shows all the funds of the city and how the funds stack up in size. The general fund and water funds are the city's two largest fund groups consistently, and right now with water having the Willamette Water Supply Program, it is somewhat inflated. That project should be complete and in service in 2026. So we'll see that side of the water budget shrinking over time. We have 62 distinct funds, and this group's like funds together to show you where city resources are going at a glance at kind of a 60,000 foot level. Oops, next slide. This slide is showing you by category, the same pie, but showing you the category of expenditures, including personal services, capital outlay, etc. The personal services, as you would expect, is a very large part of the pie, with us proposing having at the end of the biennium 1,027 full-time employees and upwards of 500 part-time employees at any given time. This, if without the capital outlay in here, you can see that the personal services make up about 70% of the total budget, operating budget. Capital outlay is at 35% of the pie. It also does include the capital reserve in there, but we do have some very significant capital projects included in the biennium budget that we'll talk about here in a few. So this is where you start to see how hard, and I'm assuming you all read the budget, all 900 pages. I know Anthony, Councilor Martin probably did, but I'm assuming the rest of you did as well. But what you probably found pretty quickly is it's actually kind of hard to compare an annual budget to a biennial budget, and we are even struggling with that. So you'll hear us as we talk, kind of go back and forth comparing 23, 24 to 22, 23, so that you can actually get a better feel, because comparing to the biennium, everything's doubled. So it doesn't really, it's not very helpful. So we're very excited to be another biennium out where we're comparing a biennium to a biennium, because it'll be a lot easier to explain the fluctuations. So forgive us if we are still trying to get the lingo down a little bit, because it has been somewhat of a challenge. In just the budget message alone, just trying to talk about the large fluctuations, which is what I'm about to go through here at the highest level. It can be somewhat of a challenge. So please ask questions, but just know that we're trying to learn the lingo here. So what you're seeing here on this slide is the same thing you saw in the previous slide, but in of course a table format, and it's an all budget category comparison. So you can see everything that we budgeted in personal services for the first year of the biennium, the second year of the biennium, and then the total. And then what we do on the far right, in many of the charts that we had in the proposed document, because of the hard difficulty in comparing, we compared 23, 24 to 22, 23, because we thought that would be more helpful to the reader. So some of the big changes, the total budget increase, and then on the bottom here, what I did just yesterday was attempting to take the reserves out, because what can be very confusing is the first year of the biennium is where the beginning fund balance lives. And the reserve, what you expect to have at the end or the beginning of the following biennium, should sit in the second year of the biennium. And so what I tried to do at the bottom here is just break out the reserves from the appropriations so that you could see a truer look at what the increase is without considering the reserves and then considering the reserve fluctuation separately. So looking at the bottom here for a second, we have a 15.71% increase from 22, 23 to 23, 24 for $120 million. And in the second year, we actually have a budget reduction, excluding reserves once again, of 23.48%, going from 881 million down to 714 million. There's lots of reasons for that. Most of that is in capital. And then when you compare the reserves, so you've got a 315, I should use works better. Thank you. So that is the reserve that's in the 22-23 budget. That's contingency, capital reserve, any unappropriated, any fund balance. And that is what we're anticipating ending the biennium with. It's a decrease of 47 million or 15%. That is primarily due to the planned drawdown in water funds related to the Lima Water Supply Program. So for personal services, we'll talk a little bit more about that change. So the 15.71% increase or 120 million is due to adding 37.63 positions, the PERS and medical increases we've discussed, the cost of living adjustments we've discussed for not only the new positions, but the existing positions. This represents an 11% increase in personal services, so right there. In between the two fiscal years, and a 14% increase, percentage of total increase in the budget. So this $17 million increase represents 14% of this $120 million. In the second year, personal services increasing 13.2 million or 7.8% due to the addition of the 35 positions, the cost of living adjustment, the PERS, and the second year of double-digit medical rate increases. Materials and services is decreasing by 10% in the first year and another 8% in the second year, and this is primarily due to the drawdown of ARPA funds, the American Recovery Rescue funds. That's why I just say ARPA. And special expenditures is here, special payments. That is decreasing due primarily to paying off the South Hillsborough LID beneficiaries. So we just recently issued our debt for the South Hillsborough projects that we completed and basically allowing for the gateway into South Hillsborough that allowed for the development to continue in South Hillsborough. We had Washington County put forth money up front as well as one of our developers. And so that is budgeted in the current year at 24.8 million, and that has been paid. So we're seeing that that's not repeating itself in the following year. So that's one of the large reductions. And then we're seeing an offset of that with increases in our support services charges. So that's our finance people, our HR folks, facilities and fleet. So that reduction is being offset by costs related to support services, facility fleet, insurance, and other. It decreases again in the second year due to the spend down of our Metro affordability bonds. We're assuming by the end of the biennium, we will have entirely spent our Metro bonds, whether we do or not. That's what it's budgeting to do on the projects that Robbie mentioned, both in the Dolores project as well as potentially the project in downtown on Block 67. That reduction is also offset by increases the second year, also related to support services charges that are increasing, and they're increasing for the same reason that the general fund or that all of the funds are increasing because of those personal services costs, those escalators and cost of living, et cetera. Capital outlay, so that's this 648 million is what is included in the biennium. Capital outlay changes from year to year really aren't that meaningful, so it doesn't really make sense to compare, to look at the increase. It makes more sense to look at the projects are actually in there. So just to give you a quick glimpse of what's included in that 648 million. We will start out with 11 million in our pavement management program. We have 5.6 million for the multi-use path on Shoot Road, that will be paid by Intel. We have 226 million, the largest amount, for the Willamette Water Supply Program. We have 31 million for the biennium for the police headquarters. We have 17.5 million for our Sohi Fire Station, another 14.1 million pending funding for the shelter, 120 million for the new ballpark, 102 of which will be funded by the HOPS. And there are many, many other projects included in that number. And the CIP section is a wealth of information and document. If you want to dive in, you'll see lots of projects. Feel free to ask any questions that you may have on those. Debt service is the next one. We're seeing an increase year over year of 4.8 million from 22-23 to 23-24 related to the anticipated debt on the new ballpark to secure the 18 million to be paid back by TLT. So the city is we have a new ballpark budgeted for 120 million. Of that, 18 million will be funded by the city of Hillsborough using our transient lodging tax. But we will go out and issue debt in relation to being able to come up with that 18 million. So there is some debt service that is anticipated to start in fiscal year 23-24. In addition to that, not yet approved by the city council, but we are looking at issuing an additional $40 million in debt related to the North Hillsborough Urban Renewal District for land acquisition and aggregation. We also anticipate debt payments on the South Hillsborough LID bonds that we just spoke about a minute ago. In the second year, it's increasing again by 15.5 million, and that is primarily due to the planned repayment of the interfund loan between the building fund and the SIP fund for land acquisition in North Hillsborough. We also have the half a year in the second year for police headquarters because we will be issuing some debt related to the police headquarters because we won't have enough cash on hand to be able to fund that project in its entirety without issuing debt. Transfers are increasing slightly between funds. This is always a moving target. Transfers are never consistent from year to year. This is just moving money between funds depending on what capital projects are going on at any given time. So it's not a real, and it's not a very significant increase. Okay. And then I mentioned already that reserves are anticipated to decrease by 47 million over the biennium, primarily again due to planned drawdowns in the Willamette Water Supply Program. Slide, please. So now here, this is the total overall net budget. This slide has been included in our budget document for quite some time. However, in our budget presentation to you all, but it's actually in our budget document now. And it's important, but it's still one of those that's hard to explain on a biennium. So we'll do our very best. When you think of a $1.8 billion budget, which is what our budget starts out at right here, you think, oh, well, they're planning on spending $1.8 billion. Well, there's lots of duplicated appropriations embedded in that $1.8 billion because there's lots of money moving between funds and they all require appropriation under Oregon local budget law. So what we attempt to do here is to show and subtract all those duplications so that we can get down more to a net number so that you can see what we might actually spend in a given year. And then we take that a little further and we back out the reserves because the reserves are what we plan to have available when we start the next biennium. So again, this is a hard comparison to make because of the biennium. Next year, this will be the next time we're in front of you in the biennium cycle. This will be a better comparison. So now we're just going to look specifically at personal services. As you can see, personal services are increasing 11.34% from 22-23 to 23-24. And that represents $17.2 million in the first year. And it will be increasing 13.2 million or 7.8% the second year. All of this is going to start to sound familiar because I'm going to keep repeating the same things because there's a lot of commonalities throughout, and we're adding positions across funds, and all of the escalators that we've talked about are impacting, are reflected here when we talk about PERS, et cetera, and medical, et cetera. This increase, of course, includes the 37.62 positions that we've already talked about in the first year and the 35 positions in the second year. It includes the 12.9% medical increase in the first year, as well as 11.9% in the second year, cost of living adjustments. We also assume not all non-rep employees would take advantage of the deferred comp match, so we budgeted for this. You can see on the far right, this weighted average, it shows how much of the increase is related to salaries, which you would expect that salaries would be the largest percent of the increase, but you can see that the second largest is medical and the third is PERS. Our new positions are representing about 3.6% of the increase in the first year of the biennium, or 5.5 million. Once again, over the biennium, the two of these total together, PERS and medical, are 102 million or 29% of personnel costs. So they represent 102 million of this $351 million budget. Great. Thank you. So this slide is just attempting to show you all the positions that we've already talked about multiple times. So the general fund, we are adding 15.63 positions over the course of the biennium. However, that's the net. We're actually moving positions out of the general fund and moving them down to our community development support services. So the big takeaways in the general fund are the 10 positions that we spoke about earlier for fire to staff the fire company for South Hillsborough. Robbie mentioned a law enforcement data analyst in police, the code compliance officer in the second year, as well as several positions in parks and recreation. So again, we're adding a net of 15.63 over the course of the biennium in the general fund, and overall 72.63 positions. The biggest position areas where growth in positions are is public works. We have 16 positions that we're adding during the biennium, and they have a backlog of projects. They have a local service fee for both sewer and storm, and they need staff to be able to execute a lot of those projects. Not to mention just keeping pace with the growth in the city and maintaining service levels across 3 distinct utilities. Also, we have water, and water will be adding 21 positions over the biennium, and those positions are primarily going to staff the new water treatment facility that we will be operating on behalf, and the new water Willamette water supply program like it is up and running. Okay. Thank you. So this represents all the capital improvement projects budgeted in 23-25 across all disciplines. We've already mentioned some of the larger projects: police headquarters, the Sohi Fire Station, the Willamette Water Supply Program. Just a reminder, this is the city share of the Willamette Water Supply is $534 million of a $1.6 billion budget. 226 million of that 534 million is budgeted in this biennium. We have the homeless shelter in here, fleet facility expansion, the new ballpark, all living in these various different, the largest are projects are in water and facilities at 251 million in water projects, and then 201 million in facilities projects. Next slide, please. So now we get to the fun stuff, where we start talking about all the individual budgets. And what's going to happen here is I'm going to talk about the general fund, and I'm going to take it through the broadband fund, and then you guys are going to be so excited that I'm going to stop talking. And I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and John, and they're going to take us home, hopefully to the end. But please don't hesitate to ask questions. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on the general fund. As you probably heard here, we have some cost escalators that are making it challenging to have a balanced budget for the general fund. So we've had to do some unique things, and we're gonna take a little time to talk about those.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Judith?
I have one question, slide back, you were talking about the water department, which basically is for the treatment plant. That number that you had up there, Hillsborough is not paying for all of that, that's people that work for the WWSS, but TBWD, Hillsborough and Davidson are paying. Does that number represent the?
So because they're employees with the city of Hillsborough, we are representing them here as increasing our staffing, but you're absolutely correct. A share of many of those positions, and we actually have that breakdown, I don't have it here with me, but we'll go towards the partners. Not only in the William Water Supply Program, but also Barney and also Joint. Mission.
Just that one item alone for the extras for the WWSS, Hillsborough will only pay approximately 38% of that number.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, I should have probably said that. So the numbers, because they are again our staff and will work for the city of Hillsborough, that's all we're really trying to reflect here. But fortunately, we have partners and we won't have to bear all of those costs.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay. All right, well, we're just gonna dive into the general fund, because it's fun. General fund is fun. So you saw this back in February. These are the results, the financial results from 21-22. As you can see, and when we were in front of you in February, we talked about this. We didn't hit our target. In May of last year, we came to you with a projection that we would lose about $100,000 in the general fund. It actually came in around $1.1 million loss in the general fund. We knew we were going to come into the red, but it was not in our favor. We actually ended the year with revenues higher than our May forecast, but our expenditures was where we really took the hit, and both underestimating personal services and our support and facilities charges. The good news, and I think we always need to remember this, and the good fiscal planning and stewardship of our budget committee, our city council, is we came out of the first year of the pandemic at 24.8% reserve balance. So just as a reminder, how that's calculated, it's very simple calculations, basically looking at the cash at in the bank at the end of the fiscal year and dividing it by your actual expenditures. We want that number to be above, our goal is for that number to be above 20%. We by policy need it to be above 15%. And that's going to be the focus. Robbie already mentioned that. Our whole goal here is to maintain that 15% reserve by the end of the biennium. So we talked about in last year, we thought we were going to end the year at 21.35%. We actually ended at 20.19%. So next slide. So here is the projection for 22-23. This was last May when we were in front of you. This is what we projected. This is what the middle is what we projected when we were here in front of you in February. And here's what we're projecting now. And of course, again, not going in the right direction. So we're projecting a third year of losses in revenue in the general fund, which we again had anticipated, just not to this significance. It's causing a rapid decline in our fund balance. So we started the year with 20.19, and we're expecting to end the year at 16.18, which is a 4% change over the year. Again, we were fortunate in going into.
Talking for a second. Yeah, what are the three lines for this year?
For this year, so in May of 22, when we were in front of you, we had a projection of where we thought we would be. And in February, we came to you with another projection. We said it was looking worse. And now we've updated that projection again, and it's looking even worse.
Don't come back.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Quick question.
What would you say are the major contributors for that? Negative projections.
Well, I am gonna talk about that. We're gonna have a long conversation about that. That's gonna be the fun part of this whole meeting.
The reason I ask for that, because I always look for no surprises. And I want to make sure that we can anticipate better on that.
Absolutely, agree, 100%. All right, yes, next slide, please. I'm out of order. There we go. So you just asked, what are the contributing factors? So that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. So the reserve balances are a combination of things that are can be directly correlated to the pandemic and some indirectly correlated to the pandemic. We're going to attempt to quantify those for you in the next few slides as best we can to show the impacts on both the revenue side and the expenditure side. Again, I'm going to keep saying this, so I'm going to sound like a broken record. Our whole program here is to end the biennium above 15%, and then to plan to manage reserves back to 20% over the next several years. The city worked really hard to take care of our employees and our community during the pandemic. We had some very well-intentioned, we made some very well-intentioned decisions during a very difficult and challenging time. Unfortunately, some of the impacts of not only the decisions, but some of the things that we didn't have any control over, like lost revenue, because we couldn't open our facilities like in parks, and hotels couldn't operate and have hotel stays and bring in TLT. We're seeing some impacts on our reserve balances. So we had over 3+ years lost revenue in both our transient lodging tax and parks. Our ARPA funding, we have not used to date for any lost revenues or additional costs related to COVID. We provided COVID leave to our employees. They had not only the federal leave, but we also provided, city provided an additional 80 hours of leave, and also increased that leave when it was exhausted by employees impacted by COVID. That leave alone had impacts on overtime, especially for our police and fire folks who, when there's a body gone, they have certain minimum staffing that has to be met, and those need to be backfilled at overtime. We opened our Hidden Creek Community Center. The timing was just perfect to finish this amazing, beautiful facility right when at the beginning of the pandemic. And we did end up waiting and didn't open it right away, but it did end up opening during the pandemic. We did no layoffs during the pandemic, but we did continue to have wage adjustments. Other additional impacts factors are the additional 2% that I previously mentioned for non-represented employees. We had budgeted 4%. We went from a step and range system for parks part-time employees to a single rate of pay, and we did that frankly because we couldn't compete in the market as wages kept going up and up. So we needed to adjust our pay scale to be able to be competitive and to be able to get people to want to work for the city of Hillsborough. Our overtime trends are not going in the right direction. We'll show you that. We did add some additional leave, our mental health day, as well as Juneteenth, and that did have some impacts related to overtime as well, because we do have to backfill those shifts for police and fire. We did add the rescue unit last year, as Robbie mentioned. That was unplanned and unforecast previously. We added the part-time benefits that I previously mentioned. We have had some core services changes and expansions, and we're now in a world where we're dealing a lot with community services in a different way when we're talking about housing and homelessness, and we're getting a lot more into that space, and that has a cost to it. I have pay equity on here, and I have not been able to quantify that. And I think, again, a very well-intentioned law, but I believe that from what I've seen, that we've been bringing people higher pay into the organization, and they have less room to grow. And then they're looking at the next level where do I go next? I come in top step. I can't back that up. That is my gut telling me that after working and seeing the offers that we've been making coming in, just the finance department alone. Our franchise fees aren't.
Can you clarify that again? So it's, we hire staff that were not able to, they're looking for growth and we don't
So
offer them.
I'm not an expert on the pay equity law, I'll just be honest, I'm not an HR professional. I'm talking from a financial perspective, that's what I'm here for. So I'll just say from what I'm seeing, the offers that I'm seeing come in, they seem to be on the higher end of the spectrum. You can no longer ask an employee what they previously made. We had a recent example of an employee that we were trying to recruit, go through the whole recruitment process and then asked for a pay that wasn't what we had advertised. It was actually about $50,000 more. But you know, nonetheless, I think just from what I'm seeing, and I'm not gonna put HR on the spot on this because I didn't talk to them previously about this, but it's well-intentioned, but when you don't have any, you don't know where someone's coming from, and you're looking at this factor point system, you're trying to figure out where to place them. I believe people are getting placed higher on the range scale. And then they have, of course, they don't want to be stuck there, so then they were looking for the next opportunity.
And so, you're not being an HR expert, but so are they moving on? Or are they staying?
We have definitely had some turnover, but that, I'm not sure we could relate that to pay equity. I think that's for a lot of reasons beyond that. Again, I don't want to get too deep in this arena because this is not my expertise, but I threw this on the slide because I think if I were able to do some analysis on this and spend some time on this, that's what we would find.
Robbie, do you think at some point in the future we could get something more definitive?
We could try. It is a really hard thing to quantify, as Suzanne said, and I think maybe from an HR perspective, again, it's a great goal that the state of Oregon had when they implemented the Pay Equity Act. But what's happening is when we bring someone in, not knowing as much about maybe some of their background, bringing them in, we have to bring them in at the same level oftentimes as someone that's already been here for multiple years. I think that's what Suzanne's alluding to is typically, right, several years ago, we bring someone in earlier, lower in the pay scale, they kind of work their way through. That was just kind of the normal traditional way to do it. Now, a lot of people are coming in at the higher end of the wage scale. And so again, that's great for those individuals. That's also more of a challenge on budgets. And so it's not eating the Hillsborough. It's just, it's an act that caused more, higher wages, which I think was by design. And now we're just, again, we feel the impact of that. And so it's a hard thing to quantify. I agree with Suzanne. It'd be really hard to really say then, is that leaving people leaving? I do think there is something to the fact that when you bring someone at the top end, they don't have any more room to grow other than cost of living adjustments. And so sometimes that does lead someone to say, okay, well, I need to go somewhere else to find, another job that will pay me more because they're already topped out here. So it's just some of the unintended impacts of the Pay Equity Act.
And so when somebody comes in, and if I'm understanding it, they're coming in at the top of the schedule. And so maybe after a year or so, they have hit the top step. So the only way for that to increase is to raise and create a new salary schedule-wise, or they may have to leave if money is their determinant. And so the growth isn't so much personal growth and professional growth. It is just the growth of their wages.
Yeah, and maybe one just clarification is not everybody comes in at the top step, right? That we should clarify that because there are some positions that we are able to bring them in, kind of at the more traditional areas. But it is one of the things we saw as a result of that act is we see more people now coming in and we have to pay them a certain level. And it was just more expensive.
Robbie did such a better job explaining that than I did, because really what the crux of what I was trying to say is we used to, from a budget perspective, be able to budget a place in the range. We'd say, okay, we're going to bring in people on average at step 3 or on average at step 4. Now we have absolutely no way of knowing. There's no control over that. It is completely dependent on what that person comes in at with their experience and how they fit into the folks of comparable character. So I think that was, thank you, Rob, because you triggered what I was really trying to say. Does that help at all?
Yes, but I'm gonna ask another question, which I know you are not the expert, but, I'm thinking like when, people are looking at a city and a city job and that kind of opportunity, they might be walking into this with like, how many years do I have? And what's gonna be my potential for growth? And so they, don't have that, then I could definitely understand why they might want to leave. So, the pay equity, is important. But I don't know if the approach is hurting us with as far as recruiting and retaining people. And I'm thinking particularly people of color and, trying to enhance our diversity. So I'm just, thinking about that because I think people, might be worried about what their career pathway is gonna look like. And I think post-COVID, people are able to build that if they have the wherewithal to go ahead and do that. But this is kind of telling me that they're maybe coming into here and already looking beyond the city. And that would be, I mean, we're not hiring people to keep them forever. But that is an investment that we're making into people and what they provide to the city and their skills and experience. And I'm concerned if that's creating kind of revolving door, especially if we're talking about high paying positions.
Yeah, Councilor Rucker, I think those are all really good points, and it's such a deep discussion, because there's also generational factors, right? Newer generations have just more, they're more likely to move to more jobs than maybe, generations that get ready to retire. It's an interesting dilemma that a lot of organizations are working through right now. And so, we strive to have jobs where people do have room to grow in the organization. We want to keep people because you're right, it's a significant investment. And there's always going to be some people though that they choose to leave the organization for good reasons, right? And we want to be supportive of them growing as well. And sometimes those growth opportunities won't always happen.
So, and of course, I'm looking at it, the human side is the most important thing. I'm here brought it up more from a financial perspective in terms of what potentially are contributing factors to why costs are escalating at a higher clip. So the last one on this list is, it's not really a loss in franchise fees, but we have not been seeing at the same level of increases in franchise fees because of loss of fees related to broadband. So if there was a court case that the outcome was that cable providers who also provide broadband no longer have to pay right-of-way fees or franchise fees on their broadband revenues. And that came out in November, I believe, last year, and that is having an impact on our growth in our franchise fees. So now, next slide, I'm going to attempt to.
Before you go on, so here, did that kind of fill out? You answer the two.
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually is. Hesitate to ask more questions, but I just want to see what else you have. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe some of them, the next couple slides will answer them. If not, let us know.
The only thing I was going to say is with the challenges facing bringing in new experienced expert personnel. What is the city going to be doing to retain them as part of this game plan? I'm sure HR is probably.
Yeah, one thing that I should have mentioned as well, the city is in the middle of doing a classification and compensation study right now. And so we try to do these periodically, right? Because we always want to make sure that we're competitive, not only with other cities, but what's really, really hard right now is being competitive with the private sector, and especially special service districts. That's where we're really challenged. And we probably as a city won't ever be able to catch up to the private sector and the special service districts, which is why then you see things like we really focus on our benefits in other ways, right? But it is a challenge. And so trying to find that balance of making sure we're paying as well as we can to be competitive in the market. That's what we're trying to do right now. offering a very good benefits package where people want to come and work for the city of Hillsborough. There are other things besides pay, but pay is a really big one, you know, and we want to be an employer of choice where people want to come and work and stay and spend their careers here, so. But yeah, the class comp study is something that I wanted to mention, that's something that we're doing now, and that will be something that we'll finish by hopefully the end of this calendar year.
All right, so now we're gonna take a little bit deeper dive on the revenue side of those contributing factors, so I can give you a little bit more detail. The upper left, most of you have seen this before, definitely, you also have, this is the transient lodging tax and parks program revenues. And those have been the two main revenue sources in the general fund that were the most impacted by the pandemic. The blue lines represent the actual TLT and parks program revenue. So in 18-19, here's where we were. We fell down to here, then way down in 2021, started to climb back up, starting to climb back up again here. This is projected year end for 22-23. But when you compare projected year end for 22-23 to where we were in 18-19, we're actually still below that number. This orange line or bar is it. We normally look at our revenues and assume a 5% growth rate, especially when we're in light of how much we've been growing. We're growing in South Hillsborough, North Hillsborough, et cetera. So had we grown from here at 5% per year, which is what we would have been forecasting back in 18-19, you'll see that this is the estimated losses. And I should have put this in a different color, but this is the cumulative loss over that point in time if you assume we would have had a 5% growth. And that's $15 million right there on the revenue side. So we're starting now back here, and now we got to try to grow that to get back there. And that's not an easy thing to do. So that's a big contributing factor is the loss over time of these two important revenue sources. Additionally, I mentioned the timing of opening the Hidden Creek Community Center. When we budgeted for the Hidden Creek Community Center that first year, we had budgeted for it to have a cost recovery of 77.7% or 78%. So our revenues were supposed to cover 78% of our costs. Well, to date, and it's been open now for two years, we have seen about a 27.5% cost recovery. And that's for a lot of really good reasons. We wanted to open the facility. We didn't want it to sit there, but that has had an impact. So when we built our forecast, we assumed that it was going to cover costs at this cost recovery rate. So that was around another 2.7 million. And then I mentioned the right of way. We'd had a couple of years where we were seeing 15 is the percent here. We were seeing 15% increases in our right of way. And now here's 22-23, we're looking at about 5%. In our projections, we had been looking at 10%. So that adds up to about $1 million. So you take all of these combined, you're looking at about 18.6 million over the course of the last several years in what I would call lost revenues. Anticipated revenues, forecasted revenues that we did not achieve. See the next slide.
Suzanne,
Yes.
with the TLP and the parks, because I don't just automatically connect those two things. And so are we seeing, a more rapid recovery in our TLT, or are we seeing more rapid recovery with our parks revenue? So if you could kind of parse that out, or even, what are the trend lines showing? I mean, we expect that, for instance, with parks, it may take us longer to get back. However, with TLT, we're going to be back there this year.
So with TLT, we're going to be, we're actually budgeting about $500,000 more next year. I think it's 500,000. I have a slide that will tell us, but it is actually going to beat the 18-19 projections next year. But parks program revenues are still not anticipated to get back to the 18-19 levels for probably a couple more years. And that's one of the things that we're gonna look at. We have a slide here that talks about what are we planning to do, in this, biennium to manage to that 15% and then to continue to work back towards that 20% reserve balance.
Makes sense too, because it didn't end just, COVID didn't just end, we came back slowly, right? So it wasn't just off and then on again, right? So. Thank you.
It was off, then it was on, it was off, and it was on.
A little bit on personally.
Suzanne, I have a question for you, Dave Judah. You made a comment about the Hidden Creek Community Center, and I don't want to twist your words, so I'm gonna ask you to clarify. You kind of said we had it completed, so we might as well open it, but you made it sound like that was the difference of, are we gonna lose less money by letting it sit there and not opening it than open it and losing money because we're in the negative and not in the positive? I'm kind of interesting to know how we decided that opening it and still running at a loss was a better idea than not opening it.
Well, we never anticipated it was gonna cover all of its costs, right? And we also didn't know how fast. I mean, there were so many unknowns about when are we gonna be able to be not 6 feet apart, and certain programs could open, but others couldn't. So it was able to open but not function at its full capacity. I think there were capacity limits, and I don't have the exact timing of when. I can't remember. Can anyone remember anything of the pandemic? So I'm trying to remember where we were in the pandemic when we did open the facility. Like, were we in masks? I'm sure we were. Were we 6 feet apart? I think we were. But I honestly don't remember exactly. We also didn't, I mean, sure, there's calls you could make today that maybe in hindsight maybe wouldn't have opened, but then we have this facility sitting there empty when it could have actually been servicing our community. So, but yes, it now looking back after we've opened it, and it's been open for 2 years, and trying to decipher. I mean, this took some work to kind of go through and see, okay, where are those contributing factors coming from? And one of them kind of started standing out as, well, we opened the Hidden Creek Community Center when we had expected revenues of a certain amount, and we haven't achieved those revenues at this point. And this is just me trying to show you of the big areas in the revenues that we think have played a role in part of why our reserves are negative.
I can also add to what Suzanne said. When COVID hit, we actually already had some staff in place for Hidden Creek, right? We hired a Hidden Creek manager, so we already had some, right? So we could have just left it open and closed for all that stuff, but we already had some. We did kind of ramp up though, right? We didn't just open and have it fully staffed with all programs ready to go. We were able to hold some positions open. And yeah, at the time, it was just one of those decisions. Do we let this building, beautiful facility just sit there? Or frankly, at the time, it was something we were trying to push to have people come and get out. It was an odd time in COVID where we were trying to provide opportunities. If you remember, maybe not the best example, but there were some communities that shut down their outdoor parks too. Didn't let anybody go out to outdoor parks, right? We didn't. We tried to encourage outdoor things were really important. Well, Hidden Creek, even though it wasn't necessarily outdoors, we were trying to provide more opportunities for people to actually go and do it in a safe way. It was very well done. It was a thoughtful plan, always within OHA guidelines. So yeah, it was a difficult decision, knowing that we were going to lose money by opening it, but we also wanted it to be open and ready for when the public was ready to come back.
So financially, we could have just let all the staff go. We had every reason to do that, but you hung on to it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. And a follow-up. I would be curious to know, maybe from this point on, or now that we are back to some semblance of normalcy, what is our cost recovery say from January 1 to this point? The pandemic and our 27.48% cost recovery. Okay, that's in the past. And so, but going forward, if we're still at 27.48%, a year from now or 6 months from now, then that becomes a bigger concern in a different way. The other point is, I was going to say, I know when we have schools, we build schools, and At one point, we were looking at not opening one of, I think it was Liberty High School, because of some budget situations. And yet, one of the reasons that the school district did open it, was because a lot of the HVAC and a lot of the roof, was all warranted for 1 year. So if we didn't open it, and you waited a year, and then there were leaks, then there were HVAC malfunctions, it would be the responsibility of the school district. So I don't know if Eden Creek had a similar, first year warranty, kind of coverage, but if so, then I think that was wise to make sure all the systems are working and the roof is not leaking and that sort of.
I'm sure that's true, and I mean, we build homes to live in, right? They're meant to be lived in and used, and so again, I think at the time, but I still think it made sense to open it, and I think what you just said is really good, and I probably should have had that information, how is it done this fiscal year? Over not just the course of it, since it's been open, so we can go back and look at that.
Quick question, Suzanne. So this is considered long-term debt for program area, correct? Is that what that's considered?
It's not that.
It's not,
No, what I'm trying to show here is things that we had planned for in terms of revenues that did not come into fruition.
Okay.
So it's not debt though, but it has had an impact in contributing to why we're drawing down reserves at the rate that we're drawing them down. Does that make sense?
yes,
Maybe if I could just, I think Suzanne said this earlier too, but I think it's an important point. Let's just pretend for a second that COVID didn't happen and instead we got the revenues that we were projecting. We'd be $18.6 million essentially today more than we have now. And it's interesting when you look at what she's about to get into, which is the amount of our whole, right? It correlates very closely. So that's just why it's important to kind of talk about the impact that it really had on us.
Any more questions on the revenue side? Because we're going to move to the expenditure side. All right, so these are some of the contributing factors on the expenditure side. Keep in mind that a lot of this actually impacted all of our funds, but we're really just focused here on the general fund. Our support services funds, so finance, HR, IT, about 70% of the cost of those funds actually come back and are charged out to general fund. That's why you see that column up there for support services as well. So as part, again, of our effort to better our benefits for part-time employees, we now offer single coverage to part-time employees who are regularly scheduled 25 hours a week. This is costing us approximately $245,000 a year. Last year, we added a medic unit with 6 fire personnel running 24/7. This estimated cost of the medic unit was $1.7 million. And that includes $450,000 for the actual vehicle. We added an additional 2% wage adjustment in September 2022 for non-reps, and this impacted the general fund an additional $650,000. That followed with the police negotiating and settling with a 6% COLA as well. Both were budgeted at 4%. So this police increase, the 2%, was an additional $500,000. The employer paid share of family leave has added about $300,000 impact to the general fund. Single rate of pay for parks, that's us like shaving off the bottom of the pay plan and only having the one single rate of pay for parks by classification, added about $400,000 impact to the general fund. We added the mental health day in Juneteenth. Most of this cost, and you'll see that in the orange, is loss in productivity for time, or just like vacation or holiday. But many of the roles that we have, especially in the general fund, are 24/7. So you're adding time off, you're adding overtime, you're backfilling. On the right is our actual and projected year-end overtime. We've seen a rapid increase in overtime over the last 5 years. There are, once again, several contributing factors. This is having a big impact on our staff in both police and fire, probably more so in fire and police because they're very understaffed. They have certain minimums that they need to attain each day and each shift. So when you're short-staffed, you're calling back folks at overtime, and a lot of our employees are tired, and we will be working hard, as Roddy mentioned, And our chief out here, and police folks working hard to recruit, more police officers to lessen the impact on our employees and of course on overtime. Additionally, the COVID leave backfills I mentioned previously had a significant impact on overtime. I'm trying to remember if I said this previously, I don't think I did, but we had 125,000 hours of COVID leave that was used by our employees across all departments. And they have now been terminated, the leave banks are now closed down, terminated sounds so bad. So but from the time that they were started till the time that in late March, I believe is when we stopped the leave. We used 125,000 hours across the organization. Finally, another contributing factor is the increase from 3-person to 4-person staffing in fire has also had a significant impact on overtime. So the concern in all of these expenses is they're not one time. They're primarily recurring expenses. So you add a cost of living adjustment of $500,000. Well, next year that's compounded with another cost of living adjustment, PERS rate increases, etc. So had they been one-time costs, we would be a little less concerned, but they are all primarily ongoing recurring costs. One more slide. So got to talk about other bigger contributing factors that we talk about every time we meet, and those are, of course, PERS, and then we'll get to medical. So we are again at the start of a new biennium, and as you saw in the previous slide, rates are going up. The left represents, so this represents the rates. So back in the biennium 15-17, we had rates for OPSERV of around 10%, and they have climbed up to, I think they're at 18% now. Similarly, increases for folks OPSERV, police and fire, and tier 1 and 2. This side of the slide shows the dollar amount. So back in 2016, we were just under $10 million in PERS costs across the organization. Now we're up to $25 million in a single year. I had mentioned previously that the city has budgeted over $48 million for PERS costs alone, which represents 13.7% of our total personal services. Average PERS cost per employee is almost $22,000 per year. For somebody making an average salary, we're using our average salary of $99,000. Of course, there are people making more and less than that amount. Next slide.
Suzanne, I have a question there. I know in the past, the PERS board has sent out projections, basically saying that the next biennium after this, it's going to more stabilize. You may have some more knowledge about this now, but could you talk, like, I know we're using our full PERS stabilization fund this year, so are we effectively planning that PERS rates will stabilize or at least not increase by near as much as they have been?
So really good question, considering what I'm about to embark on, being on the PERS board. But to be honest, I have not been spending a lot of time with that of late because I've been working on this. But we had heard last biennium and the biennium before that we would start seeing it flatten out and start to come down. With losses, and we are not seeing the 7.2% assumed rate of return is very hard to attain, right? And we've been seeing losses in our own portfolios, and those continue. So the only other place that comes from is employer rates, right? So I will be much more knowledgeable here shortly, but right now I don't have that crystal ball, but I don't think they're flattening out the way that we had hoped. All right, medical costs. Here is a look. We talked about medical costs going up 12.9% in the first year and 11.9% in the second year. Again, these are estimates. Total medical and dental costs over the biennium are close to $54 million or 15.3%. We don't have a history of the rates here. At some point, that would probably be good to have that in the slide. The average medical cost per employee is $23,402. An employee, again, with full family coverage we're likely paying about $30,000 on their behalf. So contributing factors going forward, inflation. So we looked at the initial contributing factors, now we're talking about contributing factors that continue. Inflation continues to persist, although we do seem to have some loosening. However, just last night, we were at finance committee and bids seem to still be coming in high and higher than our engineering estimates. So that continues to be an issue, we continue to have supply chain issues, et cetera. The second bullet here is reliance on unexpended appropriations. We have historically been able to rely on unexpended appropriations to work towards helping meet our reserve targets. But with higher costs, higher inflation, we're not seeing that give back in unexpended appropriations. All agencies in some way rely on unexpended appropriations to help their reserves or shore up their reserves. So this is an area that we're going to want to focus on and potentially work our way out of being quite as reliant on unexpended appropriations in the future. We've already talked about PERS and medical, but obviously those don't appear to be going in our favor anytime soon. We continue to see legislative actions requiring expenditures of funds, i.e. unfunded mandates. Paid leave Oregon, again, very well-intentioned law to help employees care for loved ones or themselves during challenging times. However, it is an unfunded mandate. There is the cost of the city at 0.4% of the employer rate, plus the addition of new staff in HR to manage the program and software to track the program. And not to mention the potential cost to backfill positions for individuals that utilize the program that are yet to be seen, as we know the program is not live yet, and I understand it potentially might be delayed as they need to build up additional resources. So we have a big unknown out there as to what the utilization of this program will be. And I think my take is that people, because they're individually paying in 0.6%, are going to feel like this is something that they should be able to use. So I think we're going to see a lot of participation. I don't think we have a good feel for what that's going to mean in terms of where we need to backfill. I mentioned this in our meeting in February, but fire, they come in waves. So not like, onesie twosies where you hire maybe a couple police officers. To open a new fire station, you need an entire company of 15. And we had planned for this cost. This is something we planned for, but it is coming at the same time as many of these other costs. Also, the more assets you add, the more assets you need to replace, and we're seeing an increase in replacement costs, not only the cost to replace things, but also the amount and the volume of things that need to be replaced annually to maintain our equipment in good working order. This is something we'll continue to work through our asset management planning work. As Robbie mentioned, we're in the midst of a class and compensation study. While we hope we are well positioned in our costs, we do expect there will be some adjustments. And I already mentioned the WCCLF impact. Next slide. So how does this one look? So with all that good news I just shared on the contributing factors we just talked about, obviously we need to manage and make some one-time changes and do some short, near, and longer term planning to right the ship. I need to say this, we've been an extremely well-funded organization. And we have been so fortunate, almost, I will say, to a fault, as we have not had to deal annually with cuts in staffing programs that so many other organizations deal with routinely across the country and across our state. So we aren't used to seeing graphs like this, right? You're used to me showing you a graph like this, but it's several years out. This is this biennium that we're budgeting for. So that's what you're seeing in front of you right here. So it's important to note that our fiscal stewardship and our focus on reserves, as well as our strong dedication to economic development, we are not here proposing cuts. We're not, this slide looks like this, and here we're still not proposing cuts. We're actually still proposing some increases to the budget. So how do we do all this and still end the biennium above 15% as the stated goal? Saying. And I wanted to sorry, hold on. Okay. Next slide, please. So the proposed budget that you have in front of you includes one-time resources moving into the general fund over the biennium from 3 specific funding sources. Many years ago, the city created a PERS rate stabilization fund. This fund was originally funded with contributions from all funds. That allowed us to create a side account with PERS that, believe it or not, has actually helped keep our rates from growing as much or as rapidly as we are seeing. Over the last many years, the city has moved SIP funds into the PERS rate stabilization fund that we are proposing to use now to for the new PERS biennium to offset the PERS rate increases in the general fund. Secondly, the city received over 18 million in ARPA funding. To date, none has been used to replace lost revenues, which is an eligible use of these funds. Staff has reviewed the framework plan for use of the funds and has freed up 3 million to go towards revenue replacement of the funds. And even with that 3 million, there still remains 6.3 million unexpended to date. And finally, SIP comes to the city in 2 agreements with Intel, one from 2005 and one from 2014. This last year, between those 2 SIP agreements, and these are abatement programs, tax abatement programs, they generated over $25 million. We have historically used this funding for capital or debt service on capital facilities like the Civic Center where we sit today, library remodels and expansions, the Cherry Lane and Jones Farm Fire Station, a Wood Street training facility, soon to be SoHi Fire Station, and the police headquarters, and so much more. We are again very fortunate to have this funding source to fall back on in these circumstances. So this is like having a bank account that is on the side, and we're able to now, in times of crisis, maybe not crisis, but in times where we're able to go and look to another fund and be able to go, okay, because we put this money aside, we're now able to use this for these one-time purposes. And let me stress that that's no accident that we've had put this funding aside. Keeping these funds as one-time funds has been very intentional. We have done that with the same intentionality that we have invested resources in economic development that have allowed and provided the environment for these private investments in Hillsborough. We are proposing to move 12 million into the general fund, which will continue to allow us to fund depreciation for assets over the biennium, as well as to keep the goal of maintaining 15% reserve at the end of June 2025. So I didn't show you here is the slide. So this is the first rate stabilization fund at 5.5 million, ARPA replacement at 3 million, and the 12 million that you see there from the SIP. And as Robbie mentioned, we put that other slide next to it to just kind of show had that revenue not been lost, we would almost be where we need to be today. And then this slide looks a lot better once you add $20.5 million over 2 years. We will still likely operate at a loss in fiscal year 24-25, but we should be able to maintain the 15% with strong fiscal discipline, as well as some additional planning and work that we'll talk about next.
So I'm gonna pause for a second. Any questions, any comments or feedback? Because this is something we've not had to do for a long time. And I'm very grateful for the healthy reserves and I think frankly the good stewardship. You know, that the budget committee has, I guess, led with for years, and also the good stewardship by all of our departments. But I just want to make sure that we pause for a moment. Okay, thanks, Al.
Thank you. Here's the question I have. On the $18 million that the feds gave us, of which we've been able to almost pay 3 million.
No, we've actually spent 9 million.
Does any of that $9 million now become an entitlement program?
No.
No? Thank you.
And let me be clear, we've already perfected the ARPA funds, so they've all been cleared. All of the expenses have been accounted for, so we don't really have any restraints on the remaining funding sources, the remaining funds.
just to cover this again, so for 22-23, the long red. Bar. Is somehow gonna be balanced with the 23-24 green bar? Cause I'm looking at it that way, but,
So these are on the left here, and I probably should have oriented you several slides ago, so I apologize. On the left is revenue minus expenses. So what you're seeing in 22-23 is that our revenues are less than our expenses, or projected to be less than our expenses by $3 million. And what you're seeing in 23-24 with that infusion of funds from PERS rate stabilization and from ARPA, we should be able to operate in the green in this case, for next year. And we could have, played with these numbers. We could have moved left next year and moved more the following year. You see that we're at 17.66% here, and then we fall down to 15. We could have moved less money in this year and moved more in this year, but it's the way that we ended up budgeting for it.
second one more. The county, we are relying on the county for ARPA funding.
No,
Okay, so is that coming from the
the
state?
money is in the bank. We have it, we have a separate fund. We'll talk about that fund. We received the 18 million in 2 tranches. And that's something that we've had now, date-wise, I can't remember, but we've had it for at least a year.
Okay.
From the federal government, correct? It came directly, it was a direct allocation to the city of Hillsborough.
Suzanne, Dave Judah, certainly we've struggled with the result of COVID and the other reasons that we put up there, and the impact on our revenues versus the expenses that we've had. My fingers are crossed that we don't have another pandemic starting in a year or two. Our reserve won't be above 15%, and we won't have this other bank account to draw from. But what I really hope we have in place, and I'm just asking you this from a discipline standpoint, does our budgeting department have a set of rules or some guidelines that if things do get worse, what we're going to do first and what we're going to do second, and what gets cut? Maybe we have a preset threshold, and I don't want you to even tell me what it is, but I don't want to play doomsday either, but we need to have disciplines in place if we get another hit like this. So I just wondered if we did it. Thanks.
So no, I can't hand you a plan today that says, this is the order that things would be cut in. It's something that we've actually talked about doing and we haven't actually done, but the next slide is going to talk about some of the things we are going to do.
Can I add as well? So going back to, so this biennial budget is so confusing and hard, why do we do it? And I want to give it an example of why it's going to be so important. Because a year from now, we'll still probably convene the budget committee. This is going to be a very different type of meeting. It's going to be more of a check-in halfway through the budget, right? So, and Suzanne will kind of get into a lot of this, so I don't want to steal all of her thunder about things that we're going to be doing as a city. But what that gives us the ability to do a year from now is if we aren't on track to meet our budget so that we're going to be above 50%, we can make changes halfway through the biennium. We are adding 30-some positions in year 2, and with the exception of maybe some of the public safety, maybe some of the water, we don't have to fill them. We can hold off on filling, right? So it gives us time to kind of straighten the ship halfway through the biennium. And so that's why I think looking out 2 full years, even though while it's not very complicated to do now, it also gives us a lot more time in advance to write things before we get to the end of the year. So that's one of the things Suzanne was talking about. But I just want to say that's one of the reasons why we're moving to biennial budgeting. It's the longer term look and the ability it gives us to make changes in advance.
Dave says thank you. So a question, because sometimes we hear at the national level about potential clawbacks, that, the Congress or the House will, want to draw back unspent money. And I just want to confirm that none of our money, our dollars are allocated, they're approved, and would not be subject to any clawback, because if they were, then some of what we might plan on using might not be available. And that was a question.
Yes. So, we could be audited. And there could be something that could show up in an audit that they didn't agree with what we felt was an eligible expense that we put forward towards state ARPA funding. But the ARPA funding has all been accounted for and expended per the rules of ARPA already on eligible expenses. And basically that allowed us to take, because personnel was an allowable expense. So we used, and John can speak to this better, but we went through what the eligible expenses were, and we used expenses that we were already incurring, and we applied those against the ARPA funding so that we could, to use the word clean, but so that we could perfect the ARPA funding and do everything that we're supposed to do from the perspective of the federal government, and then free that funding up so that we weren't tied to the all of the rules that come with, you know, $18 million of federal funding. So can I guarantee we will be audited and something will be questioned? We haven't seen anything so thus far, but the money, the 18 million, as far as we are concerned, has been expended for purposes of the federal government. But we are still sitting on approximately 9 million if you count the 3 million that we plan to move to the general fund and the 6 million of remaining funds that are sitting in our ARPA fund for the various framework projects.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I wanted to just share my thoughts on this. I think it's important just to, you know, I think one of the things just for the public as well as for you all that, you know, we're using one-time money to cover what are ongoing expenditures. I mean, that is what we're doing. We're taking one-time money, covering ongoing expenditures. However, the reason why I personally feel comfortable and think this is a fantastic plan to get through it is the ongoing revenue that we lost. Gonna have to bump up to be able to catch up, hopefully. We have 2 years to be able to adjust. I think the other component here is a lot of the stuff that puts us into the negative are capital projects that we can choose to follow through or not, or another component to figure out if there's another way to fund them, say via general obligation bonds or another thing. A lot of the things that we're trying to do that are services that are sorely needed in our community are things that require capital improvements and then also those ongoing services. So I just want to say that perspective. I think it's important to know, you know, often we don't talk and it's because we're all on the same page. And it's important to just let everyone understand that, yeah, the graph is scary. It's, I'm glad that we're looking at it and planning for it 2 years down the line. And I think this is the most prudent choice for us. So I just want to say that.
Yes, thank you. It's not easy to spend what we typically use for one-time funds for projects, be able to point at Civic Center or projects like the Brooklyn Library. And now know that we're using that to shore up the general fund in terms of operations and ongoing expenses. But everything you said, yeah, spot on. Thank you. Next slide, I believe. So what's the plan? So how do we move our way out of this and get beyond being concerned about just being at 15%? Because we want to get back to 20%. So new and vacant positions will require approval for hiring. And that's very common. What's the first thing you do? You look at your expenses that you can control and you control them. So we will have a system in place where all vacancies are reviewed prior to hiring as well as the positions. We will have regular check-ins with our general fund departments as well as our other departments, but to work with them to monitor the budget, make sure that they're on track, and that there aren't any unanticipated things that we're aware of. And we'll also be looking, as Robbie said, we have this opportunity midway through to go, okay, let's slow things down, right? We can't add all these positions, we need to take a step back. So we just need to manage the revenue that we have and that we're seeing. So that's kind of the immediate stuff. There's more things we can do in the immediate term, but those are the things that struck us to put here, include here today. Near-term considerations, this is one that we've been talking about for quite some time, and as we see our medical costs increase, we have people that are married here that work here. We have people that have outside insurance. So we're going to look at what a medical opt-out program might look like. You end up paying something to those employees that do it, end up opting out. But as you can see, it costs $30,000 for a family, and if they're, you're not gonna throw a number out here, but if you're paying something substantially less than that, it might be worth looking at something like that. Planning on doing a cross-departmental workshop this summer so that we can work with other employees to get ideas, really brainstorm. What are things that they see in other organizations that they came from, public organizations, whether it be economy of scale on certain types of expenses, or potentially different revenue sources that we haven't tapped into that would be available. And that gets into the next one. We'll be doing fee reviews, cost of service studies, specifically working with our Parks Department. The Hidden Creek Community Center is just one of the obviously things where they areas where they collect fees for programs. So we'll be working with them very closely on trying to get closer to our pre-pandemic parks projections. There are some long-term planning review fees that right now our general fund pays for all long-term planning. Our short-term planning, our current planning is funded through fees, but our long-term planning, we don't really have a fee to capture that, but other agencies. So we're gonna do some research on that because we understand that other agencies are somehow capturing some of those expenses through some types of fees. So these are just some examples of things we're looking at. This is not intended to be any kind of all-inclusive list. Additionally, for fire inspection, and we understand that annually, there's certain requirements for commercial buildings to have inspections. However, we don't have a facility or a way of charging for that, and it's something we could potentially look at. Reviewing our right-of-way fees. So currently we're on the low end of our franchise fees. We charge lower than our partnering fellow agencies like the city of Beaverton. We're at the lower end, and I'll show you an example of what that could look like in the next slide. Longer term considerations are reevaluating our local option levy. We've been at the ballot 6 times, most recently in May of 2022, passing in a very high rate of 83%, I believe. So that's always an option. It's come up before. It's certainly something we can discuss. I did put general obligation bond on here. We get called occasionally, like, how do you fund that? How do you do that? It's like, well, we have this SIP funding source that is unusual to the city of Hillsborough and Washington County as well, that we have been able to not have to go out for general obligation bonds to build a civic center, to build a library. But at some point that might be something to talk about. We threw on local marijuana tax. We're on the lower end of that tax. Look at that, and various other things. The next slide is, I wanted to throw some good news in here. So you're not seeing a projection beyond beyond the biennium intentionally. There's a big unknown out there in 25-26. The 2005 SIP sunsets in 25-26. We do expect to see a fairly significant increase in our assessed value that year. The question is how much. When the 1999 SIP sunset, we had a 12.7% increase in that year in AV. That was a pretty significant year, and that was a $12.5 billion SIP, whereas the 2005 SIP is a 25 billion SIP. So we're going to be trying to get some numbers on this, trying to work to see if we can get a little bit more certainty about what that could look like. I will caution you all, even if we do get a significant increase that year, which I do believe we will have a fairly significant increase, a lot of it is machinery and equipment, and it will depreciate rather rapidly. And we did see that when the 99 SIP came. So it's good news, but it also potentially will depreciate fairly quickly. And then the other thing that you're seeing on this slide is just giving you an idea. If we were to look at increasing our right-of-way fees or franchise fees, I like to interchange the names for them. Currently, our electricity is at 3.5%, our natural gas is at 3%, sewer, swim, and water, which are all our utilities are at 3.5%, and solid waste is at 3%. All of these could go up to as high as 5%. We've historically been on the low end of the franchise fees. And this just gives you a glimpse of today projecting for these franchise fees to be about 16.4 million. And if you were to increase them to the max of 5%, that would add about 7.5 million.
But you said it could go up to 5. I know that we have franchise fees that are higher than that as well. Why 5?
I don't, my understanding, and I'm not the expert on this, is that telecom can go up to 7. But I don't believe that these can go higher than 5, but I'll confirm that.
Yeah, I didn't think there was a legal limit, but I've always seen like boundaries at like 9%-ish. And so that's where I was curious. So I'd love to see if we are legally limited, because I was under the impression we aren't.
We'll check into that, and granted, we have to remember that anything we do here has a rate impact on our community, and so we would want to be very cognizant of that. And it could be something that we look at incrementally. You know, it doesn't have to be going up to 5, it could be 0.5%, it could be, done, like I said, incrementally. Down below is just a quick look. I like to toot the horn for our urban renewal districts. They are doing very well. They're out there doing what they're intended to do, with meeting the goals, their specific plans, both in North Hillsborough and downtown. Our North Hillsborough Urban Renewal District is young, it's still only in its 7th year. It has incremental value in 22-23 of almost $900 million, so getting closer to $1 billion. With taxes levied tax increment of 10.3 million in the current year. If you equated that back to what would come on the tax rolls, if we were to close out, which we're not proposing to do at any stretch of the imagination, there's a lot going on in North Hillsborough, and this is not the time that we want to close out the district. But just to give you an example of what will happen when they do close out, and this is just today, we'd see about $4 million increase in our taxes if both of these districts were closed out. And again, they're not ready to be closed out, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how well they're doing. The next slide shows you the same information that you've seen previously. This is specifically related to North Hillsborough. This shows you that that the North Hillsborough is growing very quickly. We're seeing at 69%, 95, 90, 27, 90% most recently in our increment growth. And then here is the assessed value that I was just talking about. This is the front of the base. So the two, one netted against the other is how you get to that 900 million. So over time, we've seen a 235% increase in growth. So this is really important because it's looking a lot like Bronner Acres in terms of, and this growth will go back onto the overlapping tax jurisdictions when the time is right. And now this slide just shows you the assessed value and what this is all actual. So we had a 5.6% increase in assessed value in the general fund and a 3% increase in tax increment. That's why we're feeling comfortable at the 5% mark. We had 5% the year before. This is the year that I was talking about where the 99 cent came back on the tax roll. And then you see a couple of years later, we didn't get quite the AV growth that we would have hoped. So that's what we need to be cautious of. Next slide. Yeah.
I was just gonna suggest, we've been at it for a couple hours. We just got through a really big part, but there's still a little bit more in the general fund. So it might make sense right now to take a recess for a break. If that makes sense.
That'd be fine. So let's take about an 8-minute break. We'll reconvene at 8:20. Thank you. Somewhere. So Suzanne, thank you.
Okay, gonna get started, and I'm gonna roll through a bunch of these slides related to the general fund. We're gonna try to make up some time here. So we got through the heavy stuff, right? And I hopefully we answered a lot of questions related to the general fund and how we're balancing that over the biennium. So now we're actually talking about the general fund budget, the actual budget for the biennium, and these several initial slides are just showing you what the budget is. So this is the general fund resources at a biennium look, $312 million budget. And this is on the revenue side. You can see that we rely 60% of our revenues come from property taxes in the general fund, which you would expect. The second largest revenue source in the general fund is our franchise fees. And other financing sources that you see here, that 10.34 million that's on the left is that money that we were talking about coming in from ARPA and from the birth rate stabilization fund. So next slide, please. So now we're on the requirement side. So this is looking at the expenditure side. And we, as you would expect, personal services, large category in the general fund. We've already talked about the positions that we're adding across the general fund. And costing about 7.8 million between all the things we've already talked about. We are next largest category is our special payments, and of course that's our charges from the support services funds. So we can move to the next slide, please. And if I'm going too fast, which I don't think anyone's going to say I am, but if I am, let me know. All right, so this is looking at the general fund expenses a little bit differently. It has, we're looking at the 21-22 adopted budget for the departments, for each department compared to the 22-23 adopted budget compared to the 23-24, 24-25. And in all cases, they're going up, as you would expect, based on everything that you heard from me this evening about the cost, escalating costs and further cost of living. I'm not going to go through all of those things on the left because you've heard them all already. But again, you can see the police is our largest department, the largest number of staff. We can move to the next slide. Sorry. So this is looking at the change between 24-25 and 23-24. Michelle prepared this in a little bit different format just to shake it up a little bit, but this is the adopted budget and by category. And comparing it, as you can see, this trend continues to go up, and we've talked about what the expenditures in personal services. Largest expenditure there is the new FTE, both in primarily in fire with the 5 to help get to the 15 company, as well as all the other expenses that we've already talked about related to personal services. Next slide, please. All right, so this is looking at the general fund expenses, just a little bit different, looking at this excludes contingency and unappropriated fund balance. This shows the pie and how it's parsed out. Again, police is the largest department. Parks and Rec is, according to this, the second largest in terms of overall costs. However, Parks and Rec also brings in some significant revenues that if you were to look at that, it would be taking up less of the resources in the general fund from property taxes. So next slide, please. So we're going to go through the departments fairly quickly. Again, you've heard most of these things. So we're looking at the police department. They have a budget of 47, almost 48 million next year versus 44.8 million in the current year. Over the biennium, their total budget is appearing $100 million for 2 years. We're seeing a $3.2 million increase from 22-23 to 23-24. That represents 2.5 positions. We have a very significant upgrade in our body worn camera and taser. It's not that it's so much an upgrade as it's a new contract. We're buying pretty much the same equipment, but once you invest in the body worn camera systems, you have to maintain them. And I think they've gone to similar subscription-based, I believe, system, like everything else that we're seeing in the way of software. So that's actually a $1 million increase over 5 years. So we're only seeing 2 years of that increase. We mentioned the enhanced recruitment, and then we're seeing some additional costs associated with support services. Not in this fund, but we also have 54 million sitting in the facilities management fund for the new police station. We only anticipate spending about 30 of that 54 million, but we have 54 million planned to be spent over the next several years towards that project. We're estimating that total project right now to be around 70. We have 2.25 million in police fund replacements.
Before we go on, could you go back just for a second? And I just want to point out the stars.
Oh, yeah.
And the key, that those are council priorities. And so I appreciate you kind of highlighting, you know, where, how our priorities are being supported, you know, in our budgets.
Yeah, we started doing that a couple years ago, and I apologize for not acknowledging that, but yes, so we try to do that where we can. And definitely those two starred positions were noted earlier when Rob was talking about council priorities. Fire and rescue, we have an increase year over year of $2.3 million. This includes 5 of the 15 firefighters for the Sohi Fire Station. And over the course of the biennium, we'll be adding another 5. You have to add all the ranks. They're coming in as firefighters, but then other people will get promoted into the various ranks to complete the company. We're seeing an 8.1% increase in WACA 911 calls. It costs a lot to outfit these folks. They've got the new employees that will be adding on the biennium. So we have $557,000 in the budget to outfit and train our new FTE. We have some replacement costs associated with our cardiac monitors, approximately $1 million. We also have funds in the facilities management fund for the Sohi Fire Station construction. And we are budgeting for 3 pumpers, 1 for the South Hillsborough Fire Station and 2 replacements. And they are very expensive, as you can see from the bottom left. 1.36 million for the pumper for South Hillsborough. And then we'll have another 2.2 million for the other pumpers. So that seems low, but they're 1.1 each, yes. Okay. Next slide is the Parks and Recreation. We have 7 new FTE budgeted in the biennium. One of the positions is being called the Facilities with Safety Liaison for the Chute Park campus, and this will be shared with the library. We are adding at the start here 250,000 to continue to have Wi-Fi in our various parks. And we see some funding in our Parks Capital Projects Fund related to park layout purchases. We'll be updating the Ron Tonkin field video board replacement. Some funding going towards Shark to work on the pool liner replacement outdoors. And then we are looking at part of improvements or replacement costs associated with the Ron Tonkin. It's time for that Ron Tonkin field turf to be replaced. So we're putting $2 million aside for that. Next slide, please. All right, library. We have 1 full-time librarian was offset. It was created, but it was offset by some part-time extra labor, but also adding admin support specialists in the 2nd year. We already talked about the WCCLF funding. We talked about the facility safety liaison position. Looking, library is very interesting. It is. I just want to make sure I don't miss something here. The sliding doors. So if you want to make somebody happy, add sliding doors to the library. Right? So that's right. So that's 40,000, and that is for Brookwood. Chute Park, sorry, Chute Park. Brookwood already has the sliding doors. And we're looking at about a $590,000 increase over the year over year. Planning, transportation, systems, and municipal court all combined. We are moving some planning positions that are in the general fund to the community development fund, department and support services. We are adding 2 new FTE to planning and transportation, basically CDD. See, we're going from 19 positions in the general fund in planning down to 14 because we're moving 5 of those to support services. Next slide, please. So this is the general depreciation fund. We are transferring in some money from our SIP fund for an annual contributions towards replacement of our precious assets. We have 1.43 million sitting in this fund related to our work program. We talked about the cardiac replacement monitors for fire. This is where they're budgeted. Talked about the turf replacement. This is where that's budgeted. We have some funding in here for ADA transition plan for parks, as well as self-check replacement machines for our library. Affordable housing and community development block grant funds. We have 25.6 million budgeted for the remainder of our Metro Affordable Housing Bond funds coming into the Affordable Housing Fund and to be utilized on, on the Dolores and the Tanis Point area, as well as, potentially in block 67. We do, annual transfer in from SIP to contribute towards community housing projects, and fund support. And then, our community development block grant program, will receive, award $695,000, which went to finance committee last night for how that funding will be utilized, as well as the $750,000 estimated award for 2025. And this, of course, is the council priority. Now we're in economic development funds. This is our economic development department. There are 8 FTE in this department. They're supported by a general fund transfer, as well as Genentech SIP agreement comes in here. So about 1 million. That Genentech SIP agreement will also sunset in 25-26. So we'll be looking to have to increase our general fund contribution to economic development in that year. This is where we house our E-zone community service fees, and we're expecting approximately 3 million in E-zone community service fees over the biennium. That funding is primarily required to be utilized for workforce development, which is, of course, is a council priority along with economic development. And listed below are several of the various agreements used for that funding is used for the Workforce Training Center, the Prosperidad, Future PCC, Future Connect, etc. Next slide, please. These are the urban renewal funds, and we've combined them together: the downtown urban renewal and the North Hillsborough urban renewal. Downtown tax increment is being budgeted over the biennium to be about 4.4 million. We also have budgeted for a loan. We have budgeted that for the last at least year, potentially 2 years, where we may need to enter into some additional debt to be able to help fill gaps in financing related specifically to block 67. The North Hillsborough Urban Renewal District, we're expecting tax increment over the biennium of around almost $22 million. I mentioned earlier that we potentially be looking at issuing an additional $40 million in debt to aggregate land in the North Hillsborough area for future industrial development. And there's about 14.7 million in debt service on the existing 2 outstanding loans, also in the biennium for the North Hillsborough District. Next slide. This is the SIP fund that we've talked a lot about, and this is where we'll be transferring money over the biennium to the general fund. Over the course of the biennium, we're expecting approximately $53 million to come in over the 2 years. Those funds have primarily gone towards, as we mentioned several times, capital development, much of which is we leverage this money towards debt service to fund those capital projects. So we have about 61 million of principal outstanding as of July 1, 2023. We will be issuing in the second year likely $40 million related to the police headquarters, and the SIP fund will pay for that debt service over time. We also have the funding for transferring money out of SIP for the SoHi Fire Station, as well as the Brookwood Fire Station that we need to pay the facilities fund back for that we've already acquired the land for. And then you can see all of the other areas that we're transferring money out of the SIP fund for. You can see that they are all primarily capital projects. The Gain Share Fund is our next fund. Gain Share is historically been used the last many years for Highlight, our broadband utility. And we also have a set aside for the school district of approximately 5 million in our fund balance that we've been setting aside for projects specifically related to HSD. We also have 1 million in Safe Routes to School. And again, I mentioned Highlight, but we have 16.84 geared towards Highlight over the biennium. And then this is where we're going to be funding SoHi Fire Engine out of. This next fund is the American Rescue Plan Fund. We talked earlier about this as well. We received 18.1 million in 21-22. We developed a framework plan, and the framework plan consisted of these 6 subject areas, including homelessness, workforce development, based organization, nonprofits, communication, et cetera. We've been able to stand up a water operator and training program. We've got that budget in here for 126 million. We've have work that we're doing related to cleanup, debris cleanup in the downtown and other areas of Hillsborough. And various other projects, including the $3 million transfer to the general fund that we discussed earlier.
And I know water operators are hiding that, it's 126,000, not 126 million.
Correct.
Yeah, you said it. Oh, I did. Yeah.
Okay.
So I K and my was confused.
Sorry, it's that whole pay equity thing.
That's right. All right.
Seth, I have a question. Regarding ARPA funds, will the remaining of the ARPA funds be utilized in a same manner?
We have several of the projects that the funding was intended to be used for have been completed. And then there are others that have taken a longer time to complete. So we have, I don't have it here to share with you, but we do have that laid out. And we also show where we took the $3 million from in terms of the different framework areas to be able to move that money into the general fund. They don't have that as a slide here tonight. If you're interested in that, so we can share that in later date.
Yeah, which is wondering, so it won't be the same. We have that already allocated.
Oh, I just on that, so it's the same framework in that when we created the framework, we based it off of the city council's goals at the time. So that's kind of where those 6 broad areas came from, because they were very much tied to the city council goals. So within each of those areas, some of those projects have already been completed. I think Suzanne makes like 9 million has been spent to date.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and then there's a remaining 9 million, 3 million of that will be going back into the general fund, and the other 6 million will still be programmed for these specific areas,
Okay.
just in potentially different ways than the first thing.
All right, so we are on the broadband fund, and of course, we created this fund of new enterprise to build broadband and bring broadband to our community. We have a $16.84 million transfer coming in from GainShare. And that is to continue the build out of Shoot Park Phase 3, as well as the Glencoe Hut, and to do the planning and design work up in the Glencoe area. We anticipate almost 2 million in utility revenues by the over the biennium. And about 13.97 in construction for, again, those areas I mentioned. We'll be purchasing a bucket van and a cargo van. We've got 500, the number is already outdated, but we had 566 residential customers as of April 23 and 137 commercial customers. That was my last slide. I get to turn it over and stop talking.
Good job, Suze. Sure, you can click for me, Michelle. Just like Suzanne was giving out accolades, got to give them back to Suzanne. She's a great leader for our finance team, and I'm happy to be on their team. I'm so impressed every year of everything she knows and does. Go Suze. All right, the building fund. The building division is a fund. It's funded by fees that are collected for building inspection services, plan review, and issued permits. These revenues and their related expenditures are recorded. This fund here. It's notable that 6 positions are moved to the Community Development Administration, which lives in our support services, but they're still funded by Fund 540, which is the building fund directly. So even though we're taking 6 positions out there at the bottom, 37 down to 31 positions, the personnel services is still increasing because 5 of those positions are still funded directly in Fund 540. As Community Development Department continues to evolve, we may move that funding out as we do more cost of service allocation methodologies. things like that. We may move those out to be like the rest of the CDD admin folks and charge them out through special payments. The operating expenditures from year 1 to year 2 reflect a little change as there's no additional positions for fiscal year 24 and 25, and it's a nearly flat materials and services budget, which meets the needs of the division. Included in the capital outlay, you can see some vehicles there, some are rebudget, some are newly budgeted replacements. But the bulk of capital outlay is the $33.5 million for capital reserve, which provides flexibility in accessing reserves during the biennium. There is a decrease in special payments of about $219,000. This is due primarily to the annual evaluation of cost allocation drivers that spread costs in the support services funds. Michelle will talk about support services in a few slides, so I'll let her expand there. Transfers out for the biennium include $5.8 million for the 4th floor remodel, which is underway now. Additionally, there's $5 million coming out of the building fund to the facilities fund for the disaster operations center that will be located at the South Hillsborough Fire Station. And finally, there's $4 million budgeted to transfer from the building fund to support services for a permit system implementation or upgrades to the city's permit management system. Next slide.
Quick question. A disaster preparation work, what is it supposed to be able to do? And I've got pictures in my mind. I just want to get there.
Do you want to take it on, please?
I saw Amy back there, but I can try. It's a department operations center, so in the event that we had an earthquake or something, the building department would be a really critical service that would need to be provided across the city to be able to go and inspect buildings, make sure they're safe to be in and occupy. So the idea is that they, in case they have these in different locations, so in case they couldn't do that work here for whatever reason, maybe this building was compromised, they would have another location to go to or multiple locations. Is you okay, Amy?
So I'm assuming that these structures are going to be built to be able to sustain some type of physical damage.
So it's a fire station, so it needs to be to what level of, I'm looking at you, Amy, what
It's the highest
level 4. So that, which I presume is not in their world, but it's the highest level of construction that's required for that type of building. It's 2.
Thanks.
All right, moving on to Public Works Funds, which has 4 major divisions: transportation, sanitary, sewer, surface water management, and facilities and fleet. Facilities and fleet will be discussed later as part of the internal service funds. For now, we'll focus on the 3 that provide the direct services to our community and account for about 17% of the citywide budget. At a high level, we see a first-year increase in personnel services of about $2.3 million over this current year. A major contributor to that is the 7 net positions added. Then an additional 6 positions are being proposed for the second year for a total of 13 new FTE in public works. Suzanne touched on some of the priorities there of maintaining this growing system that is aging and needs repair and replacement. So we need the staff to be able to work on those. Additionally, we have an urban forester who's coming on that will be able to coordinate care and feeding of our urban canopy. These positions are spread across the divisions of public works. Materials and services reflect a fairly level budget from fiscal year 22-23 to the first year of the biennium. Second year reflects a decrease of about $1.7 million. Of that $1.7 million is $1 million decrease towards the tough PMP maintenance program because the SIP fund will no longer be transferring funds into that program. Capital outlay shows kind of this crazy 61% decrease from fiscal year 22-23 to the first year. That's because capital reserve for each fund within public works is budgeted in year 2 of the biennium. And in the next few slides, we'll talk about some key projects that will be spent out of capital outlay. But before we get there, special payments reflect a first year decrease of about $20.9 million. Suzanne talked about the one-time expenditures of the South Hillsborough infrastructure payments to Washington County and the private developers. And that was about 25.5 million. To offset that, some of that decrease, there's increases in our pass-through money that we're giving to Clean Water Services of $3.4 million. And then $1.1 million increases in support service charges. The second year of the biennium shows a more predictable and consistent increase for regular operations and increases. And then debt service shows an increase of about 646,000 in the first year of the biennium. This is due to the start of the South Hillsborough Local Improvement District scheduled and anticipated repayments. And then the second year of that shows a similar budgeted amount for the debt service. So we knocked out the high level review. Let's get into each of the divisions. Starting with transportation is where the building of roads and maintenance of roads is performed out of these funds. Most revenues come through gas taxes received as well as vehicle registration fees. Additionally, the transportation utility fees have provided a consistent revenue source for maintenance. As mentioned on the previous slide, the capital reserves are budgeted in the second year of the biennium, so that's why there's such a large swing in that 23-24 change from 22-23 column. Some of the major changes in transportation include the funding source changes because of the urgency to stabilize the general fund. The strategic investment program transfers for the pavement management program have been discontinued. Again, as mentioned on the previous slide, the one-time South Hillsborough LID proceeds that were received in 22-23 do not continue to the biennium. The notable capital projects are listed there for the biennium: $3.7 million for Lincoln and Second, $5.5 million for pavement management program, $5.6 million for the Chute multi-use path, which is funded by a large business in the area, and the Huckman East improvements and extensions totaling $3.5 million. That's not a number on the slide, but approximately $49.6 million of capital outlay is budgeted as capital reserve for future projects. Again, a plug for the CIP section, the capital improvement program section of the budget. We'll look at that for more details. All right, now we'll go underground, focusing on to sewer first. Activities in these funds maintain and grow our sanitary sewer services. Suzanne had on a slide the Clean Water Services proposed rate increases, which you'll see here that are pending their board approval. The city retains 16.4% of the monthly sewer fee and 4% of the SDCs, while the balance is remitted to Clean Water Services. The city also charges $2.50 per equivalent dwelling unit for local service fee that funds repair and replacement of the aging infrastructure. And then some of the major projects are listed there: $3.4 million for the Bendemeer trunk line, $2.2 million for Minter Bridge to Meadowlark trunk replacement, and $1.1 million for the Third and Maple fats, oils, and grease main reconstruction. They maintain a $25.3 million capital reserve that's budgeted in their capital outlay. The last of the direct service divisions of public works is the surface water management. You can see similar highlights on the Clean Water Service monthly rates, of which 75% is remitted to Clean Water Services. Suzanne talked about the 50 cent per year increases that we've been seeing since January 2022 on our local service fee. Again, we'll see that January 1, 24, and then January 1 of 2025, which is the last year of authorized rate increases at this time. Capital reserves are budgeted at about $6.4 million for future maintenance. And then current projects include $4.7 million for Minter Bridge Meadowlark trunk replacement, $2.3 million for Minter Bridge road conveyance improvement, and $810,000 for Lincoln and Second Street improvements. Pass things over to Michelle for a little bit before I take another turn at the end. She's going to tell us what's happening under and above ground water.
Everywhere. Hello, everyone. You know, when it gets to me, we're almost done. You know how much I love really fast. So we have 2 slides for the water department and the funds that they manage. This first slide shows all water and joint venture funds combined at the category level provides an operating and capital view for the water department budget. Portions of the water budget have already been approved by the Joint Water Commission, Barney Joint Ownership Commission, and the city's Utilities Commission. This slide only depicts expenditures, so I just want to make note of some revenues. The majority of water operations is paid for with its water rates. The budget includes a current rates plus the approved 8.9% rate adjustment for residential and 10.5% rate adjustment for all other customers that will go into effect on January 1, 2024. We have built into the budget an estimated rate adjustment that would be effective January 1, 2025. However, that rate has not been approved by Utilities Commission and is just a placeholder. We also plan on drawing the remaining budget of the city's WIFIA loan, which is, I wrote it down, Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, in case we don't know what WIFIA is by now. And that is 90.6 million. And then we actually have included in the second year a second WIFIA loan of 50 million. Water department staff is currently working on that application, and we hope to know later in this calendar year if the second loan is approved.
And just for a reminder, not to put you on the spot, but the WIFIA interest rate, you remember that because it's so wonderful.
1.38%.
Thank you, 1.38%. I just.
Oh, 3.6, I'm sorry.
Keep going, keep going. You know, I just, again, thanks to our federal delegation, specifically to Senator Merkley and Congresswoman Bonamici for helping us secure that. And as we see interest rates continue to rise, the fact that we are 1.38 now at 1.36 and dropping, I just think it's just a good reminder of the great leadership that we've had in finance and water, partnership with our federal delegations.
I don't think we'll probably get that amazing rate on the 15 million, but we'll try our best. So as we mentioned already, there are going to be 20 new FTE in the water department over the biennium. Of this 21, 12 are for the Willamette Water Supply Treatment Plant that City of Hillsborough staff will be operating, but not 100% paying for, as Dave Judah shared with us and asked us about earlier. In addition to those positions, we have a new treatment plant manager for JWC, and the operator and training position, which was previously paid for with ARPA funds, will be moved into the water department in 24-25, so that program can continue. The remaining FTE are being added to keep up with projects and operating demand within the department. Personal services for 23-24 increases due to the FTE and the coal and the PERS, all those things we've talked about already. And in 24-25, there's 9 more new FTE. Increases in materials and services in the water funds, which are, you don't see here, but you see on the second slide, as due to increases in contracts and program supplies, and in the Joint Water Commission Joint Water Commission Fund, we're seeing increases of 325,000 in utilities and 300,000 for chemicals. As John pointed out with his funds, the decrease in capital outlay of 108 million is due to reserves being budgeted in 24-25. However, capital reserves across all funds will be decreasing by 71 million over the biennium, and that is intentional and planned as we draw down these reserves for the water supply project. For the biennium, there's 227 million budgeted for the Willamette Water Supply project, 15 million for various water construction projects, and 13 million for JWC projects. I wanted to note in the capital outlay for the second year, 24-25, 48.5 million of that is for capital reserves, and we don't plan to spend that money. And I do want to point out, this is probably the last budget you will hear us talk about the Willamette Water Supply at the level that we're talking about, because when we come in 2 years, we'll be almost complete. So it'd be nice to not have to say those words so many times, but I still will be saying them for a couple more slides. Special payments have increased by 1.78 million. That is due to increase of 650,000 water purchases. Support services charges, which we've talked about increasing because of all things, is 585,000. And then an increase in joint venture operation payments of 168,000, and that mostly is to the Willamette Water Supply. Debt service is declining in 24-25, and that is due to the revenue bond series 2012 being paid off in 23-24. And transfers out are decreasing by 11.6 million because we're actually budgeting for the transfer in the second year. And that's a transfer from the water rate stabilization fund to the water operating fund. The current year amount is 11.5 million, and we're rebudgeting for that for 11.7 million. This is the third budget where we have budgeted for this transfer, and we do it to provide flexibility to meet our debt service covenants. At this time, we don't expect to do the transfer, and we'll only do it if the city cannot meet its debt service ratio requirements. And then there is a reduction of 1 million of transfer out to the water debt service for payoff of the series 2012. Next slide, please. So this is looking at the water at their fund level. There are 9 funds. All the water funds, all the 500s are showing decreases in 23-24, and that's because of capital reserves being budgeted in the second year, except for Fund 505. So Fund 500 is the water operating fund. It includes most of the budgeted personal services costs for water operations. And in 23-24, it's increasing because we all know people, COLA, PERS, medical. And materials and services is increasing by 464,000, and the capital reserve is decreasing by 49 million over the biennium. Fund 502, the depreciation fund, resources are used to replace capital equipment, some infrastructure replacement, and certain capital costs related to the city's share of joint ventures. Capital reserve is budgeted to decrease by 1.8 million over the biennium. The budget does include 7.8 million for various construction projects and 2.1 million for joint water commission joint venture reimbursement. Say that 5 times. Fund 504, our water SDC fund, capital reserve is budgeted to decrease by 18 million over the biennium. The first year includes 11 million for the Lem water supply, 1 million for Century Boulevard, 1.56 million for various projects, and transfers for water debt service. And in the second year, the capital out, we can't see that. There is a reserve of 5.1 million in the second year. Fund 505 is the fund that we created to track all things WIFIA. The city has made 7 draws on the loan, totaling 135 million so far as of today. We plan on making an 8th draw of 25 million in June of this year. As I said in the previous slide, we budgeted to draw the remaining balance in 23-24 and have a second loan in 24-25 of 50 million. Fund 506 is a debt service for the city's 2 water revenue bonds. The city needs to have 2 years of reserves worth of debt service payments for the biennium. And as I stated, revenue series bond for 2012 will be paid off in 23-24. This does not include any debt payment for the WIFIA loan. We do not have to begin payments on that until fiscal year 29-30. However, if we so choose and we have the funding, we can start making payments earlier to reduce the amount of capital interest that is accruing. And then Fund 508 is our water rate stabilization fund, where we've been putting money away to basically have reserves available in the event that we have a temporary shortfall in revenues and we need to move over money to the water operating fund. As of today, we have not had to use that. That money has continued to grow. And as I said, we've planned 11.7 million transfer out to the water fund just in the event that we need it. The Joint Water Commission Fund increase of 1.3 million is basically across all categories. It includes increases in personal services, materials and services, which I went over. Their chemicals and utilities continue to go up. They have increases in capital outlay and special payments. They have several large projects. The big one is the SCADA system, which is almost $1 million. And then they also have construction projects of about 12 million planned. And last but not least is Barney, which is basically status quo. They do have 3 projects. They have 225,000 for the boat ramp upgrade, 150 for stairs at Trask Weir. I don't know what that is. 150,000 for a resilient power supply. There isn't obviously electricity up there, so there includes, is it solar, Dave? For up there?
Yes, there's dead spots where we can't communicate. if
Right.
I remember correctly, and so they need to enhance that. The stairs at the weir
Mhm.
is instead of walking across the gravelly ground through the bushes and stuff, to read their meters.
Next slide, please.
It's not quite as good as sliding doors.
Yeah. Fence from a few years ago. Anyone have any questions about water before I move on?
Sorry, my bad.
There we go.
I really can't do two things.
Okay, so now we're going to move into the internal services fund, starting with the support services fund. Like the general fund, the support services fund includes multiple departments, including emergency management, the city manager's office, human resources, information services, finance, public works facilities, administration and maintenance divisions, and the community development administration. We have 2 slides for support services. This first one shows at the category level. And we've talked about the net increase in FTE over the biennium 27.5 with 12 actual new and 15.5 moved from other departments. The increase in personal services, I think we've belabored that, so I'm not going to talk about that. The new positions are, we have 1 position moving out of the city manager's office to IS. We have 7 new positions. Sorry, I need my glasses. There are 4 new positions in IS, with 3 of them being added to implement the city's asset management and records program. 2 FTE are being added to HR, which includes the Oregon Family Leave Program that Suzanne talked about. And 3 are being added to the Public Works Facilities and Administration Maintenance Divisions, which are needed to maintain service levels, and the fact that we are expanding our city facilities, and we have many facilities construction projects, large ones happening right now. Materials and services decrease is due to IT. We have a lot of IT projects that vary from year to year. And we had a significant amount that were budgeted in materials and services that were one time and we are not doing those same programs going into the biennium. We have a slight decrease in capital outlay, and that's due to our computer hardware replacement. During COVID, we transitioned the majority of staff from desktop PCs to laptops. So we're kind of in a lull in computer replacements, but in the next biennium, we will see a spike to replace all of those laptops. All of the personal services and material costs for support services are allocated out through a cost allocation model. And finance budget actually includes money to update our cost allocation model. It's been over 5 years. And we really are looking for their assistance in how we can spread out community development administration. So I talked about, we have some money still being direct charged, some going through the cost allocation model. And we really want them to look at that to help us figure out the best way to charge out those costs. And so, and then the projects on there are mostly in the city manager's office, as that department includes the diversity, equity, inclusion division, community engagement, and community services. So next slide, please. So now we're going to look at support services at the department level. Emergency management is basically status quo. City manager's office, I already said what they have. The increases here are personal services, so we've all talked about that, you know what the rate increases are. HR does have the 2 new positions, and they also have 100,000 budgeted for the class comp study that Bobby talked about earlier. And information services, they're adding the additional FTE, mostly for the asset management, records management. And we already talked about why it looks lower than everybody else's. Their personal services increase is actually 1.2 million, but that's offset by that decrease in materials and services. Finance has 1 new FTE in 24-25, which is a finance tech and utility billing. As South Hillsborough grows, we continue to get more utility accounts, and so we are hitting that kind of peak level where we need to add more staff. And public works facilities, admin and maintenance divisions, they are adding a total of 2.5 FTE, 3 new ones, and a half one was previously split between public works other division and facilities and maintenance. And so now we're putting them 100% in the facilities maintenance, no admin division. One of those two. Community development, we've talked about all the positions that we've moved over, and their personal services is not increasing as much as we thought, as what John said, because we're direct charging a lot of them. So, any questions? Next slide then. We're now moving on to the facilities management fund. This fund accounts for all of our costs associated with operating and maintaining the city's facilities, as well as the construction of new facilities and capital repair. All the operating expenses are funded by charges out to the departments who use those facilities based on an allocation model. Personal services is just chargebacks for parks for some of the maintenance that they do at certain city facilities. The increases in materials and services is related to janitorial expense, an increase of 280, and utilities. Those are all going up, including a large part of facilities utility budget is water and sewer, and so we see those when those rates go up on the other side. Capital outlay, we've talked about all these projects. Hopefully you're familiar with them by now. So the only one Suzanne did talk about with the homeless shelter, we do have budgeted for federal, state grants, as well as SHS, which I had it written out. I just don't see where my note is. Money from the county, and so that money supportive housing services tax that are coming through the county, we need that to be able to do that project. Special payments includes bond issuance costs. As Suzanne said earlier, we're planning on issuing 18 million from the HOPS project and 40 million for the police station. And then the debt service in this fund is for the Public Works full faith and credit bonds. It is paid for by transfers in from transportation and swim funds. All other full faith and credit debt is in the SIP fund. Next slide, please. Fleet management fund accounts for expenses related to the fleet maintenance of all city vehicles. Operating costs are funded by charges and services that are charged out to departments based on an allocation based on BEU. Included in the proposed budget. I'm tired. Is transfers of 2.5 million each year from the SIP, which we use to fund the general fund and support service vehicles, and also build a reserve. Other departments like water, public works, and building purchase their vehicles out of their own funds, and they maintain their own reserves for those future purchases. Personal services increase is there is one new FT in 24-25, and then all the other things we've talked about. Materials and services is basically status quo. And then we have money budgeted for the various vehicles, which I think we talked about. Police is replacing 25 vehicles with 8 of them being rebudgets. We have quite a few rebudgets, delays in getting the vehicles in. So we had to rebudget for some of them. The big ones, of course, for this, to replace one of the 2 pumpers and the new one. And we are, this reserve, and Councilor Martin's question from yesterday is a couple of years ago when we looked at this fund, we thought we had enough reserves to continue to do our replacements. But because of the increase in costs, like the 2 fire pumpers, we had planned for them to be 950,000. The bids in is 1.1, so that's $300,000 more. That basically beats it to money we have for other vehicles. So we have looked at this, and in the next biennium, if we have the availability of funds, we'll need to increase it, the annual transfers in to be able to meet our needs. Next one, please. My last slide, then I'll turn it over to John, is risk management and loss reserve funds. So all of the city's workers' compensation, property and liability insurance is paid out of this fund, plus it also houses our risk management division, and the personnel costs in there. Since the city is self-insured for workers' comp, we are required to have a loss reserve fund. So personal services, we did add one new limited duration FT in the current year. So that is reflected in there. We also had one position that I talked about that was split with HR. Maybe I didn't say that. That is now 100% being charged to HR and the support services fund. Special payments is where you'll see all the insurance premiums that we pay. We don't know what those rates are going to be yet. So these are based on estimates, and It is possible that they will be higher than currently budgeted. The transfer is to the loss reserve fund. Each year, the state reviews our workers' comp program and recommends how much we need to have in the loss reserve fund based on our current claims and actuarial estimates. The workers' comp costs are allocated out to departments through our payroll system. And for risk, liability, and property expenses, we allocate them out through a cost allocation money model. There we go. I am done. It's John's turn. Go, John.
Scrapping because we still have 16 funds to cover, but don't worry, it's not as severe as it sounds. These funds are smaller dollars and we cover them at a high level across 3 slides. The first slide shows 6 funds that Parks maintains that are outside their operational activity. In the general fund, these funds primarily are intended and restricted for capital development, and the lion's share of funding is generated from system development charges. By way of transfers, the Park Supplemental SDC Fund in South Hillsborough continues to make repayment of the interfund loan with the building fund. This loan repayment will be complete in fiscal year 25-26. Some larger capital projects planned for the biennium include $4.5 million for the Cressel Park Greenway acquisition and development, $7.2 million in total for continued South Hillsborough Park infrastructure development, and about $11 million in planned land acquisition and existing asset management. Quickly touching on the final bullet, the South Hillsborough Community Service Fee continues to build up revenue for future projects. This is a fee charged to customers just in South Hillsborough, of which we're now up to 1,740. This is about a 26% increase in the number of customers in South Hillsborough paying this fee. So that just is a testament to the continued rapid growth in that part of the city. Next slide. We've got 7 more funds on this page, each with their own narrow focus on how they can be spent. Most notable is the PERS Stabilization Fund. I think Suzanne's covered that pretty well, the $5.5 million that's getting transferred to the general fund to help shore up things there. There'll be a residual left in the fund for minor PERS related adjustments. The other fund that has some flux from the prior year's budget is the ITF, or the Intermodal Transit Facility. That's the structure next door to Block 67. There's $1.35 million budgeted for HVAC replacement. The slide says it will be city and tenant funded, but that's actually going to be fully tenant funded. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to our budget adjustment slide. So for the next slide, we've got a few more little funds here. These are our fiduciary funds. These are funds that the city holds and administers on behalf of other agencies and cemetery trust. The broadband user group has no relation to the Highlight Broadband Fund. The broadband user group and the Portland user group are regional partnerships for maintaining certain IT programs and shared infrastructure. Next slide. There's a couple slides I have here for some adjustments we'd like to make to the proposed budget for your approval. These are essentially some housekeeping items that we can take care of now instead of waiting for the steps between the approved and adopted budgets. So briefly, before we cover the items on the screen, we've talked a little bit about our capital reserves, and in some funds we budgeted capital reserve in year 1 and in year 2, but we're going to move them all from year 1 if they were in year 1 to year 2. So we just have a capital reserve reflected in a single year. That will give us consistency across funds and a quick way to help us see what the total amount is reserved for the future. Since those amounts will stay the same in total for the biennium, they're not included on this slide. But now the items on the slide. First, we're proposing to reclassify about $8.5 million initially budgeted in unappropriated ending fund balance in the general fund to contingency. When you budget unappropriated ending fund balance, it becomes basically untouchable with very few emergency related exceptions. So we're proposing to move that into contingency, which would ensure accessibility and flexibility throughout the biennium. Any use of these funds in contingency would still require council approval if we need to access them. The second one reflects change to move the newly budgeted position, the facilities safety liaison, moving that from the Parks and Rec department to the risk division of HR. Kind of makes more sense to align with our risk and safety folks. Essentially, the general fund will be picking up the main share, if not the whole share of the position, as it'll get charged through special payments instead of directly in personnel services. The third one, there's after opening some bids related to safe routes to schools projects for the transportation funds, an adjustment is needed to increase spending in capital outlay of about $660,000, and that will come from capital reserve. The fourth adjustment is kind of a clerical error thing. When we were putting together the final stages of the proposed budget, we realized there's some small adjustments, this being one of them in the emergency management group. It's a really small area, but because it's so small, any flex in it could create more work that we need to take care of to clean up in the future. So this is just increasing materials and services that were above the 2% and 3% assumptions that we gave folks to work on, as well as a small piece of equipment that needs to be added. Then on the next slide, there are a couple more adjustments. The first is in the facilities fund, similarly to the last one. We missed increasing the HVAC programs, as well as accidentally removed some of the normal maintenance from one of the facilities, which we're adding back in. That's coming from the capital reserve. And then the final one is the intermodal transit facility. There's a timing adjustment of when the HVAC replacement will occur there, as well as its funding source. Initially, it was budgeted in the first year of the biennium, but we're bumping into the second year of the biennium, which is why you see no dollar change there. But initially, part of that was planned to be paid for by the downtown urban renewal to cover part of the cost, but now it is planned to be fully tenant funded. So the budget appropriation is being removed from the urban renewal. Any questions on these before I could bounce it back to Suzanne before bouncing it to the mayor?
The only thing I would add on these additions that we're asking or changes is that nothing here actually increases the total budget, just moving things from one category to another. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I know that we'll have the opportunity for discussion, after we receive a motion in second, which is after public comment. But I just wanted to kind of go around the table to see if anybody had, any comment or question, and this way we'll make sure everybody has that opportunity. And I'll start with Dr. Lamaco, who is with us virtually. And so, Doctor, anything you care to say, add, or question? Welcome at this point.
I take myself off mute here. I just want to thank the staff for, again, doing a great job, probably greater this year than in years past. My only concern when I see all those red marks on the chart is if we can really afford all the things we're committed to. But I trust the staff, and I hope next year we'll be able to sit back and say, well, it was a tough year, but we've come out of it, and we're the better for it. So thank you.
Thank you. Sal, any comment?
First of all, this proposed budget really could be utilized as a teaching mechanism for local government, how a city operates and the work that goes into it. And I want to thank you all very much for your presentations. They were very clear, and put in a lot of work, and thank you.
I would echo the sentiments already expressed about the amount of thought that went into this, and especially in a challenging year like we're challenged by anyone like we face today. I think, again, I don't know, Dr. Lamaco said that we'll be able to afford everything we want to do. in the future. But I like your approach to it because it still leaves a lot on the table that we can do and visions of a brighter future. I'm really confident. Also plan for what we got, the unknowns, unknown unknowns. So congratulations, really well done. Very clear, very exciting.
Double, triple echo to like everyone's great work. Makes me feel like we're in good hands despite the uncertainties. So one thing I would be interested in seeing, as someone mentioned, kind of what's our contingency plan should stuff turn south on us, and what's like the order of operations, what we consider postponing hiring first, or projects that we would cut. And that's not something to address now, but I think that would be an interesting way to preempt hopefully a worthless exercise. We wouldn't need to actually do it, but it would be interesting to see.
So thanks for the presentation and for keeping us out of the waters, the legal budget. Like some other cities in county might be facing. So thank you for that. And I was learning something new. I do not have the background, but I am understanding more and more about our funding and how important it is. And I think the public out there, if they understood what we did and putting this together and explaining why we do what we do, I think they would really appreciate the work. And it's not easy work, and there are decisions we make and some stuff will happen unexpectedly and regrettably, but thanks for keeping us in good shape.
I've already talked too much. I'll just say thanks like everybody else did. Thank you.
I'll echo that comment.
What I would say overall is I really appreciate our strong financial planning, and I think it shows through here. We have reserves where we were able to weather both the crisis of COVID without too many adverse effects for our organization. A lot of impacts to people, obviously, which is part of why I'm very grateful. We used 15 out of the $18 million of those ARPA funds to go directly to people who were suffering, struggling, still are. I also think this is a really important budget in terms of showing that we want to have longer term financial sustainability. So recognizing that we're getting down to what our like kind of identified financial goal is, and recognizing that that's kind of growth. So I really appreciate that. I think that broadly we need to focus on we need to talk about what other revenue sources we can or should use. You know, we haven't had a general obligation fund here in a lot of years. We also have very low franchise fees. I'm not saying we have to do either of those things, but I'm saying it's something we should definitely talk about, particularly for me, the GO bond, which would be a very useful tool. A lot of the gap, I shared this with you, Robbie and Suzanne, but a lot of this gap could hypothetically be cut if we just decided not to build things. And, you know, I'm glad we are building things. And so I think that's one of the big things. Another thought for me, broadly, how can we keep the public involved, particularly the budget involved in year two? Is I'd love for us to look at or explore participatory budgeting. So giving this group the ability to have some budget authority to be able to allocate to a community project in years two, which would increase that community outreach, community engagement, and give this group you know, another way to affect the budget, particularly in years where the budget, you know, this biennial budget, particularly in the years where we're not enough budget. I've got a ton of other classes, everyone can assume, but great job overall.
I'd like to thank you all for much work you put behind all this. It's been very, very informative. And extremely curious how we compare to other cities. I know a lot of cities are struggling out there. They have the post-pandemic situation. And I think we, as Sarah pointed out, we seem to be doing all the right stuff, trying to address the gaps appropriately as much as possible, planning ahead. which is extremely credible on our side. And appreciate the work that's been done to make sure this is addressed properly. Look ahead at this list.
Something that's here, when this was dropped off at my home, I was so grateful because this is a lot to try to absorb, being a counselor. It's a perspective of the comprehensive outline that was given to us, and then to see visually for our residents, the video that was created to further engage community and help them understand how to break this down. I very much appreciate the comprehensive outline in this to help someone new coming into this, try to get a grasp on it. And also it's very cool to see being the 2 years, we're still recovering from the pandemic, and that there'll be a biennial budget, and we'll have that opportunity to adapt as we continue to recover. So thank you for all your hard work.
Just second that, I'm saying, we're making some big investments in the city's future with the fire department, police departments, and the parks department, which everybody benefits from. I would like not to ask this for much more numbers, but just total amount of employees, full-time and part-time, maybe going back 10 years would be kind of cool to look at how the city's grown and the government's grown over the years. Thanks again.
I think that information might be in the 10-year trends, is that correct?
Yeah, FTE count for sure.
Yeah, I think it is, so you might have that in your front all of that large huge document. You don't see something there that you're looking for, let's really get that for you, I think it's in there.
Thank you everyone that's still here. Because you guys are a big reflection of what we just saw. So, and my curiosity through all of this, the last couple of years, is when all this new ARPA money came in, is how are we going to manage it? How are we going to wind it down? Do we want to do the same thing with education? And how do we not accidentally depend on money? And so, it will be good to see the adjustments over the next couple of years. Just want to say thank you. I am proud to live in Hillsborough and be part of this community. I'm also grateful with how you and the staff choose to allocate resources and take care of our people, take care of our community. I can see and sense a human approach to budgeting, a number of projects that we are investing in, and we're strategic. We should do that ourselves. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So, I will close with a couple of things. One, I'm glad that the strategy to rebuild the reserves. I would be concerned if they were going to drop, stay down there. It's only because we had those healthy reserves that we are in the position that we are. Secondly, a budget, when we think of it as a lot of numbers, it also is a moral document. And, to, kind of dovetail off of, this budget takes care of our people. This budget also shows our values and our priorities, whether, it's the inclusion of Future Connect or some of our, large expenditures. And so this is a document, a budget that I think, it's a budget that we can all be proud of. And I think it's one that we can take to our public and say that these are not just council priorities, but these are the values of our community. And so thank you again for all of that. So do we have any public?
Just one more small thing. If I can make a wish. For consideration in the future is to look at investing in our libraries. Our libraries are the basic job of educating public, creating our mobility. I was looking at and reflecting on the budget and how much it's allocated to them. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you. So, anybody raise? All right, so then, with that, we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is consider approval of the proposed biennial year 23-25 budget. So do I have a motion to approve the proposed budget? The budget, well, we don't have any, well, I guess with the budget adjustments that summarized on the previous slides.
Someone,
Second, Pace.
All right, it has been moved and seconded to approve the proposed budget. Any discussion? And then we have a roll call.
Councilors Pace,
Aye.
Ruletto. Aye. Van Bevan.
Aye.
Sinclair.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Alcare.
Aye.
Acuna.
Aye.
Judah.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Shamoon.
Aye.
Gafford.
Aye.
Lamaco.
Aye.
Bianco.
Aye.
Thank you.
I still think that should be. All right, so agenda item number 7, which is looking at our proposed property taxes and levy rates for fiscal year 2023 through 2025. And the permanent tax rate is $3 and $3.6665. I count all those sixes correctly, and our local option rate, tax rate, which was renewed a year ago, is $1.72. So do I have a motion to approve the general operating rate of $3.6665 per $1,000 of assessed value for fiscal years ending 2024 and 2025? The local option tax rate of $1.72 used to determine the revenue generated from property taxes.
someone, Martin,
Second, Pace.
And then roll call.
Councilors Pace.
Aye.
Ruletto. Aye. Van Bevan. Sinclair.
Aye.
Martin.
aye,
Alcare.
Aye.
Acuna. Aye. Judah.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Shamoon.
Aye.
Gafford.
Aye.
Lamaco.
Aye.
Bianco.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, and the motion carries. So, well done, folks. Thank you all. And with that, we're adjourned.